I came home to silence. No daughter's laughter, no wife's warm greeting. The apartment was empty, stripped of life, and all that remained was a letter that shattered my world. My wife, my parents, everyone I trusted conspired against me, stealing my daughter and leaving me nothing but rage. They thought they'd destroyed me, but they've only awakened the darkest part of me. I will hunt them down one by one. I will take back my daughter, and I will make them pay. This is no longer about justice. It's about revenge. And I won't stop until they all beg for mercy. I had the window of my truck down and the radio playing as I drove home, enjoying some old songs. It had been a long week working on the highway heading north to the NSW-Queensland border. Laying down asphalt is one thing, but digging tunnels and building bridges is a bigger challenge. I started out as a worker in a bright jacket, busy on the highway. Now I wore a hard hat and a short-sleeved shirt, still in a bright jacket, but now I had a clipboard and was overseeing the work. I was just 20 minutes from home, excited to see my daughter. I was a bit less eager to see my fiancé, but I knew the time away was hard on both of them. This was part of the job. Most weeks I worked in the city, which meant I could go home every night, but usually 2 or 3 times a year I had to travel farther to manage a project. All those evenings I studied had paid off. After high school, I went straight to work. I didn't want to go to university, which disappointed a lot of my family, but I studied part-time and eventually earned a degree in civil engineering. As I pulled into the parking lot of the apartment building, everything seemed normal. I grabbed my bag and walked past the pool to the apartment, but when I opened the door, it was silent. Normally, my daughter Katie, a lively 5-year-old, would rush to greet me. Sally, my fiancée, would at least say hello from the living room or kitchen. "Hello, I'm home," I called out. I walked into the living room. No one was there. I checked the kitchen. No sign of anyone. No food cooking on the stove or in the oven. When I walked into our bedroom, my stomach started to feel uneasy. I hurried to Katie's room. I saw a few of her things on the floor, but when I opened her closet and drawers, they were empty. "No, no, no," I whispered to myself. "Where is she?" Sally's things were also gone. Everything was missing. I quickly took out my phone to call her, but it didn't connect. The number was out of service. I walked around the apartment again, and then I saw a letter on the fridge. My hand trembled as I picked it up and read it. "Mark, if you've checked around the apartment, I'm sure you've noticed that I've left and taken Katie with me. Don't try to find us. We prepared for this for months. Your trip away gave us the time we needed to get things ready. By the time you read this, we will be far away. Katie will be with a new family. He can give us what we need." Sally Katie had a phone. It wasn't really hers, but it was a phone I could use to call her before bed. Sally had given it to her, one of the few good ideas she had. I tried calling that number, but it was out of service. I called on Wednesday and Thursday, but there was no answer. I looked at the letter. Who is we? Who is us? I thought. Was she seeing someone else? That thought made me uneasy. Looking in the fridge, I was surprised to find some food still inside. I checked my things around the apartment. Nothing was missing. I looked online at our joint bank account. There were no changes, so I quickly moved all the money to my personal account, canceled her credit card, and grabbed a beer to sit down and think. I called my best friend, Mick. "Hello, Mark. How's it going?" "Hey, have you seen or heard from Sally lately?" His silence told me everything. "Mick? She called on Monday to say she was leaving you. And you didn't think to call and tell me?" "She asked us not to tell you." "Why?" I asked. "She said she was leaving for good reasons." "And? And what? Did she say why? Did I scare her or something?" "No, not like that. She just said she found someone who could give her and Katie more." "And you didn't think I should know about this?" "Me and Simone, we agreed with her." "What kind of friend are you?" I shouted, hanging up. "Who is us?" I wondered. I called 2 other friends and got the same story. I thought I had friends who would stand by me. No one said anything bad about me. It was just a case of, she said she was leaving you and not to tell you. Mick tried calling back a few times before I picked up. "What?" I said angrily. "Look, friend." "Just stop," I replied. "You're not a good friend. Don't lose control. It's for the best." "I'm not your friend anymore," I said, hanging up again. He called back a few more times, but then he gave up. I contacted the police and reported my daughter as missing. I didn't care about Sally, but I was determined to find my daughter. They asked me several questions over the phone before telling me to come in the next day. I was annoyed, but I agreed to be there on time. I sat on the couch and thought some more. If my friends already knew, then surely... I felt my anger rise as I realized my family might know about this too. They had never supported any of my choices in life, whether in sports or work. My family and I just didn't agree. They looked down on me and showed their disappointment about my life choices. It seemed like anything other than a lawyer, doctor, or financial expert was not good enough for them. Getting in my truck, I drove down the highway to the eastern suburbs, where the wealthy showed off their success. Many of them seemed stuck up, and I was happy to leave as soon as I could. My school years were full of classmates who acted like they were better than everyone else, and my siblings were just like them. It's no surprise I didn't like them at all. As I drove closer, I felt a tight knot in my stomach, and by the time I parked outside their house, I was buzzing with nervous energy. I wasn't sure if it was a gut feeling or just what I knew about my family, but that uncomfortable sensation crept up my back as I walked through the gate towards the house. I could hear voices and laughter coming from the back, another one of their get-togethers. I was hardly invited these days. I felt out of place with their crowd. The front door was open, so I went inside. The house hadn't changed much over the years. 2 living rooms, a big kitchen and dining area, a study downstairs, and 4 bedrooms upstairs. When I stepped into the back, the chatter stopped, and several eyes turned to look at me. My mother looked worried, my older brother seemed shocked, and my younger sister appeared scared. "What brings you here?" my father said with a sneer, looking down at me since I hadn't changed in his eyes. "Where's my daughter?" "She's with someone better." "What do you mean, better?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No need for sarcasm, Mark," my mother cut in. I couldn't stand her stuck-up way of speaking. I shot her a hard look and she wisely fell silent. "Where is my daughter? Where is my fiancé?" "Your fiancé is with someone who can give her a better life," he answered. "So, you know what's happened?" I asked, choosing my words carefully. "Of course we do. We introduced her to him a year ago. They left today for another country. You should just forget about them. It would be best for everyone. If there's nothing else, you can leave now." I lost my cool and stepped closer, facing him. My father stumbled back, and my mother hurried to his side, shouting something I couldn't catch over all the noise. My sister took a step back while my brother moved forward, ready to confront me. I was bigger than him, and after a moment, he backed down. Leaning down, I pulled my father into a chair, making sure to keep an eye on the others. "Where is my daughter?" "She's out of your life. We've made sure she'll have the best," he replied. I took a step back, taking them all in. "I can't believe this," I whispered, feeling the truth sink in. "Who are you people?" I asked quietly. "To do this to your own—" "I can't believe I'm related to you. No good parent would act like this." I looked at him, feeling deep disdain. "You only care about money and status," I said. "You may have swayed others, but you never convinced me. There's more to life than this. I've found it already, and you've taken the one thing that really mattered to me." I turned my focus back to my father. "I don't want this to get worse, but you need to realize how serious your choices are." I looked at my siblings. "I don't want to see any of you again. This has been a real eye-opener, but I must focus on finding my daughter." As I walked away, I said one last thing. "I hope we never meet again." "I'm going to take care of you," he warned. I turned back, meeting his stare without fear. "Do what you want, but listen closely. The day I get out of jail, I will face you the next day." I patted his cheek lightly, his eyes showing his fear. He knew how I felt about him. "You took my daughter from me. She was the most important part of my life. What you did proves a lot about you. You stopped being a father long ago, and I have no doubt the person behind you was involved too. Those other 2 probably knew everything as well, so do you really think I care about getting back at you?" I hit him again, and he fell unconscious. Without looking back, I walked out of the house, promising myself I would never return. When I got to my car, I felt hungry, so I stopped for some food on my way home. By the time I parked outside my apartment, it was dark. I saw a police car waiting for me. I didn't plan to run away, so I got out and walked to my front door. They were busy knocking when I said, "I'm Mark Samuels, officers. Is there a problem?" "We received a call about something happening at John and Cheryl Samuels' home. We wanted to ask you some questions." "Here or at the station? Am I under arrest?" "If you come to the station with us now, we won't put you in handcuffs, at least." "Okay, let's go." I had never been in the back of a police car before, so this was new for me. I didn't talk to them, just stared out the window. In that quiet ride, I realized everything I knew had fallen apart. No partner, no daughter, no family, no friends if they all knew and didn't tell me. I felt completely alone as we drove. Once at the station, they took me inside, got my information, and led me to a small room, saying I would be interviewed in the morning. After everything, I felt worn out, but sleep didn't come easy. I kept thinking about where my daughter might be. Was she safe? Who else was with her? And the big question was, why? I had been told lies about a better life, but Katie had always been happy. I cherished that child more than anything. She was my joy. I would have done anything just to hear her laugh. That's when the tears came, because deep down, I knew they hadn't been lying. I realized the chances were almost none if she was far away. She was gone. The next morning, after sipping a cup of coffee, the interview made everything feel real. I felt empty. I went over everything that happened since I got back home the night before. I thought about the talks I had, the letter I found, and the fight with John and the others. They knew I had reported my daughter as missing, but it seemed that was already taken care of. John and Cheryl had come in and said they left the country, so there was no one missing. No kidnapping, and I could see why. After all, I had hit him. Isn't it wrong to take my child out of the country without my say-so? I asked myself. It is, but let's say the guards watch more closely for those entering than those leaving, one of the officers explained. If your child is with a man and woman who look like her parents, especially if she's with her mother, it wouldn't seem strange. I spent most of the day in the cell, waiting for the door to open. I guessed it was late afternoon when the officer said, "You're free to go." Really? I was shocked to hear that. I thought I would have to spend the day in court, hear charges against me, maybe pay a fine or sit in jail for a while. John Samuels isn't going to press charges. Luckily for you, that's how it goes here. I wonder why, I said quietly, but I didn't care. That was no longer my worry. I took my things, signed a few papers, and after a serious talk about staying out of trouble, I walked outside. Back in my empty, quiet apartment, I knew I couldn't stay there. There were too many memories of my daughter. I was very angry with Sally, too. When we met, she seemed sweet, and we fell in love fast. We had talked about getting married, but she knew my job kept me busy, and she was supposed to be studying while working part-time. I felt like it was all a lie. I checked my phone and saw I had many missed calls and messages. I just deleted everything. I didn't care about what anyone thought anymore. On Monday morning, I quit my job. My boss was surprised, but when I told him what happened, he understood. I thought about hiring a private investigator, but this isn't a movie. And I didn't think John was lying. Katie had been taken far away. Where could they have gone? I would need to check data at the airport, but I didn't know where to start. I talked to a real estate agent and put the apartment up for quick sale. After that, I sold everything I could on eBay. Over the month, I cleared out my apartment until all I had left was a sleeping bag, my phone, a bag of clothes, and a small box of memories. Photos of my child, just photos of us together. Anything that had to do with Sally was cut up. She was no longer part of my life. I even changed my last name because I wanted nothing to do with the family I once had. People had come to look at the apartment, and the real estate agent was sure it would sell quickly. She promised to keep me updated about it. As I handed in my things at work, my boss looked sad to see me leave. I said goodbye to a few coworkers and made a post online about my departure. Then I headed west. I knew this wouldn't be an exciting journey. I felt numb after everything that had happened that month. Some so-called friends tried to call and visit, but if I answered, I kept my responses short. I was tired of hearing their excuses. Eventually, I canceled my phone contract and got a new number. That helped stop most of the calls, but not one last visit. When I opened the door, it was my old best friend Mick with his fiancée Simone. At first, he stepped back, surprised by the look on my face. Then he got ready to explain himself. "We need to talk," he said. "No, we don't," I replied, feeling emptiness instead of anger. "Instead, you'll listen to my story, then you can leave my life for good. Do you want to hear it, or do you want to go? Either way works for me." He glanced at Simone, who surprisingly nodded. "We'll listen to you, Mark." Some people think my life should have been easy because I was born into a good situation. But I quickly realized what my parents were like and the kind of people around me. I knew from a young age that I didn't want any part of that. They looked down on others. Everything I have, I earned through hard work. I thought I found a woman who valued that and loved me for it. I learned my lesson. But I did have a daughter whom I loved deeply. Just coming home to her made every day worth it. Hearing her cheerful voice shout "Daddy" and seeing her raise her arms to be picked up, those moments were everything to me. I worked all day just to hear her laugh. All of you, everyone I trusted and loved, have betrayed me. You broke me. There's nothing left for me here. My family is gone after what they did, and so are my friends. You helped make that happen. If I were a religious man, I'd ask God, what did I do to deserve this? Maybe he would have an answer. I never hurt Sally. I never raised my voice. I rarely got angry. She wasn't a victim. And my daughter? I would have done anything for her. You took it all from me. You don't get to stand there and say, "We need to talk." There's nothing you could ever say that would make up for what you helped destroy. I took a step closer. Lucky for you, I'm almost done with this. The only thing that keeps me going now is the thought of seeing my daughter again. You have hurt your best friend and pushed him into a dark place. "I doubt you care," I said, feeling frustrated. I stepped closer to him. "Michael, leave. Leave right now, before I do something I might regret later, because honestly, I really wouldn't care at this moment. Just forget about me. After this, I'm going to forget you and everyone else, my friends, my family. None of you will matter to me anymore. I just want to disappear." I pointed away. "Just leave." He took a step back and then turned to walk away with Simone following him. Before he was gone, he paused and looked back. "I'm sorry." "No, you're not. You're just telling me another lie." That was the last time I heard from anyone there. What I said led me to the police station the next day, almost begging for help to find my daughter. I eventually sat with another officer and shared my concerns. They told me there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I could talk to a lawyer, but if Sally and Katie were out of the country, there wasn't a lot that could be done. Still, since I was really desperate, they opened a case file and promised to investigate. They said they would contact me if they found anything. I suggested they talk to John and the others, giving them a list of names. Maybe they could help. I left the station feeling hopeless. I didn't think they really cared. I drove out of Sydney the day I decided to leave for good. I crossed the Great Dividing Range, going wherever I felt like it. For a few days, I drove without a real destination. Finally, I ended up in a place called Longreach. I knew I couldn't just keep driving forever. I would get money from the sale of my apartment soon, so I found a hotel to stay in and wandered to a nearby pub. At the bar, while I nursed a beer, I felt out of place. The bartender looked me over. "New in town?" she asked. "Sort of. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here," I admitted. "Looking for work?" she asked. "Yeah, I guess so." I sighed. "I don't really have a plan here," I said, tapping my head. "Do you like hard work?" she asked. "Sure. I used to be an engineer but started with manual labor. There are plenty of farms around. I know the MacArthur family is looking for some help. If you're willing to work hard, they might hire you." "Better than just wandering," I muttered, finishing my beer. "Can you tell me how to get there?" "Of course. Do you have a GPS?" She wrote down an address and handed me the paper. "It's about a half-hour drive from here. I'll give them a call so someone is there to meet you." "Thanks. I really appreciate it." "Before you go, what's your name?" "Mark Smith." "All right, I'll call them now. I'm Dottie. Hope you'll come back here often. The person you want to talk to is Bill MacArthur. He's a good guy." "Thanks." I smiled a little before I turned and left. The hotel was just a short walk away. My truck felt like an oven already, so I rolled down the windows, entered the address on the GPS, and started the drive toward a new beginning. As she watched the young man leave the bar, she let out a sigh. He tried to walk tall with his shoulders back, but he looked like he was carrying a heavy load, and his blue eyes, they seemed empty. There was no light in them, just living. She grabbed her phone and called a local resident. "Hello?" a man's voice came through. "Hi, Bill. It's Dottie." "Hey, Dottie, how are you?" "I just met a young man looking for a job. I told him to reach out to you." "Great. We could use another helper." "Just be careful with this one, Bill. We only talked briefly, but I've seen that look in someone's eyes before. Know what I mean? I've lost too many friends over the years." Bill nodded, feeling the weight of shared loss. "Do you know anything about him?" he asked. "Not much. Just his name, Mark Smith." "William, Bill." "A young man is coming, Eli," Bill called to his wife Eleanor, who everyone called Ely. "A new worker?" she asked back. "Maybe. Dottie just called. Said he was at the hotel looking for work." "She knows her people well," she replied as she walked out of the kitchen. Bill saw her drying her hands on a towel. "Did she tell you much?" "Just his name and that, well, we'll learn more soon." A truck appeared in the distance a few minutes later, kicking up dust behind it. Another hot, clear day, just like most days in this part of Australia. Sometimes rain would come, heavy for a bit, then none for many months. Still, the recent rain had made the land green. The trees looked healthy, and there was grass for the sheep and cattle. But Bill knew he needed help with all the upkeep. His son had left the farm as soon as possible, not wanting to take it on. Now he was in the city doing who knows what. At least their daughter was in university getting ready to help out. Bill and Eli often said managing the farm was tiring, even with some extra hands. Their daughter was hoping to take over when they retired from full-time work. The truck rolled through the open gate and stopped in front of the house. A man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6'2", strong-looking, and close to 220 pounds if Bill had to guess. He had short brown hair. As he walked toward them, his blue eyes scanned them, and Bill understood what Dottie had meant. "Are you Mark Smith?" The young man nodded. "Yes." "You're Bill MacArthur?" Bill extended his hand, and Mark shook it without hesitation. "That's me. This is my wife, Eleanor. Everyone calls her Eli." Mark smiled and offered his hand to her. "Nice to meet you," he said. Eli took his hand and nodded. "What brings you here, Mark?" Bill asked. "I'm not exactly sure. I guess I'm looking for a fresh start," Mark replied. "Where did you come from?" "Sydney." "And now you're here?" "It's—" Mark looked away, his thoughts drifting. "It's a long story," he said quietly. "Have you ever worked on a farm?" Bill asked. "No, but I have experience in civil engineering. I mostly worked on roads. I have some certificates. I was leading a project on the Pacific Highway." Bill raised his eyebrows in surprise. "So now you want to work on a farm?" "Long story," Mark said again, his voice flat. Bill exchanged a glance with Eli, understanding what she was thinking. "Would you like to hear about the job? See if it interests you?" he asked. "Honestly, Bill, I probably will take it no matter what. I've been drifting for a few days. Keeping busy with work helps me not think about things, so I'd like to stay busy." Bill nodded. "All right, follow me. I'll show you around and explain a few things." He talked about the daily tasks on the farm, mentioning he needed someone for maintenance on machines, buildings, fences, or anything else needing repairs. Mark asked a few questions, which showed some interest, but it was hard to tell if he was excited. Bill explained there were some large farms nearby, and Longreach was the only town within an hour. He shared the starting pay, which wasn't much, but he offered a small cabin on the farm for workers who needed a place to stay. It didn't surprise him when Mark mentioned he would want a cabin if he got the job, especially a quiet one. Bill led him back to his home. "When can you start?" "Monday morning. I've booked a hotel in Longreach for a few nights. I can come here first thing, drop off my stuff, and then get to work." "Sounds good," Bill replied, shaking his hand again. "I'll see you Monday at 9 a.m. Usually we start earlier, but this will give you time to arrive and settle in." "See you then," Mark said. Bill watched as Mark walked back to his truck, turned it around, and drove south to Longreach. Once inside, he took off his hat and found Eli in the living room. Sitting in his favorite chair, she asked, "So? He's interested and starts on Monday, but Eli—" He paused as her eyes met his. "I've seen this before." "So we can keep an eye on him," she replied. He sighed. "He's come here to start fresh." His wife smiled at him. "So, Bill, we should keep an eye on him. He's not the first young man to come here looking for answers, and he won't be the last." "Did he say anything about what happened?" "No, he was quiet, except when we asked him questions. He was polite. He looks strong, so I don't think the work will be hard for him. But there's a way a person walks. That short walk back to his truck just before he left. Just remember, Bill, don't push him. If he doesn't want to talk, let him be. He might need time to feel comfortable with us." "Or we might find him in trouble one day," Bill replied quietly. "Have faith, Bill. He's come here looking for work. That shows he hasn't given up yet, so we'll keep him busy and hopefully away from negative thoughts. If necessary, we'll treat him like family. We have done that before." Mark arrived a little before 9 a.m. on Monday, which was a good sign. He didn't have much with him, just a big backpack with clothes and a small box. Once he got into the passenger seat, he guided Mark to one of the quiet cabins. It had electricity and running water, but it was quite small. There was a living area, a kitchen, a bedroom, and a little bathroom. "I know it's small, but it's perfect for what I need, thanks." "Take some time to settle in. There are sheets in the cupboard for the bed. Ely put some food in the fridge yesterday. Feel free to join us for meals, but we understand if you want some quiet time. How about you meet us at the main house at noon?" "I will, thanks." Mark drove him back to the main house, which was only about a kilometer away. It wasn't a long walk, but he still thanked Mark for the ride. As he watched the truck turn around and drive off, he wondered what was in the box. Marked the cabin was much smaller than my apartment, but it would be just fine. I didn't need much space. I made the bed first before opening my backpack. I didn't have much with me. I figured I wouldn't wear a lot of my clothes, so I would need more jeans, more flannel shirts, a good pair of boots, and a proper hat. Then there was the box. I placed a photo frame of Katie and me proudly on the mantelpiece. Other photos were scattered around the rooms. I took out my laptop and set it on the small table. I'd have to ask about getting wireless internet set up. I hadn't given up on finding my daughter. I just didn't know where to start. I would think of something, but the world felt so big. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack. I then sat quietly on the lone couch. There was a small flat-screen TV and a box that meant I could have cable. There were a couple of shelves for my other things. The kitchen had everything I needed if I wanted to cook. I put my toiletries in the small bathroom and hoped the shower would at least be decent, but all I did was close my eyes and focus on my breathing. I wanted to clear my mind of all emotions. I was tired of being angry. Anger didn't help me and only made things worse. The same went for being sad or feeling sorry for myself. I would rather feel nothing than deal with those feelings. So I emptied my mind until I felt blank again. The last thing I took from the box was a gun. I had bought it in a rough part of the city. A guy I knew had a connection, and I met up with his friend in a parking lot by a tavern on the outskirts of town where no one could see us. I had seen enough movies to know how guns worked. I checked the magazine to make sure it was full and ensured it was safe. "Better not get in trouble because of this," he told me. We hadn't given each other names, just a place to meet. "I won't." "What do you need it for?" "Just keeping it safe." He looked into my eyes and nodded slowly. "There are worse things you could do, but buddy, are you sure?" I handed him the money, put the gun in my jacket, and walked back to my truck. I was surprised he didn't report me, but I planned to leave within a week anyway. I placed it on the table. The only reason I hadn't used it yet was my daughter. But every day I wondered what the point of living was if she was wherever she was. Maybe she was better off without me. Maybe it would be best for everyone if I put it away. Clearly, no one would miss me. I felt bad for Bill and Eli who would have to find me, but as long as I didn't feel pain, I thought I could go on. I stood up and hid the gun in the small drawer next to the bed. Out of sight, out of mind, but always there, just in case I wanted to end it all. Driving back to the house around noon, I knocked on the front door. Eli opened it with a smile. "Come in, Mark," she said, showing me around before taking me to the kitchen, where Bill was enjoying some sandwiches. He nodded at me as I sat down, and Eli offered me a plate of the same sandwiches. I thanked her, and we ate in a comfortable silence. I knew I wouldn't be very talkative, but Eli soon tried to chat with me. "So you're from Sydney?" I nodded with a mouthful of food. That's a long way from home. I don't really have a home anymore, I said quietly. I saw Ely and Bill exchange looks. It's a long story. I'm not ready to share it yet. Maybe later. I don't know. Ely touched my arm gently. Whenever you're ready, Mark, just don't keep it all inside. I nodded again. So, how did you end up here? I shrugged. I was just driving around. Left Sydney a few days ago. I had been driving with no real destination until I found a road that stretched on for miles. I decided to head north and ended up in this place. I was tired from traveling and thought I could do something helpful. Having some money would be good, but I hadn't touched my savings yet. After we ate our sandwiches, Bill motioned for me to follow him outside. I thanked Eli for the meal, and then he took me to the barn. There, he showed me some easy chores to do. He asked if I had ever ridden a horse, and I told him just once, but I didn't enjoy it much. Still, being on a farm, I figured I might be driving a vehicle or riding a horse. I was okay with either. I ate 3 meals daily with the couple since it was the only option I had. I got to know the other workers on the farm, but I kept to myself. I sensed they thought I was quiet and perhaps wondered about my past. They probably believed something had gone wrong for me. On Saturday, I went into Longreach to buy some things. I found a discount clothing store where I could get jeans, shirts, boots, and other little stuff. After that, I stopped at a grocery store. Even though Eli was kind enough to feed me, I had a kitchen in my cabin. I wanted some time alone, and I hoped the couple would understand. Getting into the daily routine was easy enough. I had breakfast and dinner in my cabin, and I either had lunch with Eli and Bill or out in the fields, depending on where I worked. When I was with the couple, Eli tended to talk a lot, and Bill mostly nodded along. Eli could get a smile out of me now and then, but after a couple of weeks, as I was heading back to my cabin for the weekend, she stopped and gave me a hug. "You'll find happiness again, Mark," she whispered, looking up at me. She seemed sad for me, which made me feel guilty. I quickly pushed that feeling away. "When you're ready to talk, Bill and I are here for you." She let go of me and walked back to the kitchen. "Do you have family, sons or daughters?" I asked. She paused and turned to me. "Yes, we have 1 son and 1 daughter. Do you see them often?" "Our son. Not very much. The farm was never for him. He was happy to leave. We still love him and he loves us, but he found his own path and we accept that. He calls us often. Our daughter is finishing her studies and should be back in a few months to help us with the farm." "But you love your children?" "Of course, Mark. We love them without any conditions." "So you would never do something so awful that it would hurt them or ruin their lives?" She walked back toward me and looked me in the eyes. "Never," she said quietly. "We love our kids and just want to see them happy." I needed to go. If I stayed, everything would come out, and I wasn't ready for that. I didn't know if I'd ever be ready. I just nodded, turned, and walked to my car. I drove away fast, probably getting back to the cabin faster than I ever had before. It might not have been good for the car, but I knew how to fix it. When I got to the cabin, it was dark, so I turned on the main light and locked the door behind me. I tossed my bag aside. The first thing I needed was a hot shower. I kept hearing Eli's words in my head. I didn't know if I should be sad, angry, or just mourn a life I could have had. After I dried off, I wrapped a towel around my waist, grabbed a bottle of bourbon I had bought during grocery shopping, and sat down on the couch. I turned on the TV for some noise while I opened my laptop. The internet connection was weak, but good enough. I finally hired a private investigator. I knew Katie had been taken out of the country. I just wanted to find out where. I wasn't sure how I could get her back. I was sure John and whoever was with Sally had a hand in this. The investigator said he would see what he could find, but I guessed his job was more about following cheating spouses than tracking people down. At least he had some good advice. He offered to send my daughter's picture to any police or investigation team that might help. "Do it," I said. "See what happens." I didn't expect much, but I still held on to hope. She could be gone, but not forever. He also suggested keeping an eye on John and Cheryl, watching what they did, and asking some questions to old friends. He admitted he didn't have much hope but understood how desperate I felt. Plus, I was paying him for his help. The only social media I still used was Facebook under my old name. I was curious about who would reach out. It was clear my absence had caught some attention because I received a few worried messages from people I'd thought were friends. The same friends who hadn't told me Sally was planning to leave with my daughter. Then I saw a message from Kelly asking where I was and saying she wanted to talk. She had sent that just a few days ago. The fact that she still cared about me, that she loved and missed me. I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. She didn't matter to me anymore. None of them did. I was sure she had known everything. I was sure my older brother had too. He had always looked down on me. You might love family, but you don't have to like them. I always thought he was full of himself. The moment I got stronger than him, I put him in his place. He didn't like that one bit. I would admit he was smarter, but he had always been sneaky. I was sure he had helped ruin my life and had enjoyed every moment of it. I should have faced him again when I had the chance. When I was 12, I had a few fights with my brother, leaving him with a split lip and a black eye after putting him in his place. But I knew if I started up again after knocking down John, I might have gone too far. I don't think of myself as mean. I just see our arguments as normal sibling fighting. He loved to annoy me, and I liked showing him that he couldn't push me around. He was clever, and I was strong. But after I left home, I hardly thought about him at all. As for Kelly, I thought we had a good relationship, and she cared about me, or at least she used to. With Sally, I never raised my voice. I didn't want her to feel scared or uneasy with me. We might have disagreed a bit, but we always worked it out in the end. Katie, she always seemed to get what she wanted. I picked her up from school, and her teacher called me her gentle giant. Her friends loved to ride on my shoulders while I ran around. All the moms trusted me, like I was their favorite uncle. A lot of them offered me help at the playground. I wish I had taken them up on it. Ugh, I sighed, downing a shot. I grabbed the picture of my daughter and me, leaning back on the couch and holding it close. I tried to push my feelings down, but I couldn't. Not when it came to my little one. I touched the photo. I'll see you soon, Munchkin. One day it'll just be daddy and daughter time. I knew that I probably couldn't promise that. It was hard to know what to do. This is real life, not a movie or a storybook. There aren't always simple answers, and I had done what I thought was right. Calling the police, hiring a private investigator, maybe even using social media. I drank until I passed out. The next morning I woke up with a bad headache and frowned at the empty bottle on the floor. I knew that relying on alcohol wasn't healthy, but I didn't really care. After putting the photo back on the mantel, I wiped my eyes and had some toast with butter and a strong black coffee for breakfast. Still feeling off, I walked to the farmhouse and found Eli on the porch, sweeping up dirt and dust. She looked at me and smiled. "You look terrible, Mark." "I feel it too. Does Bill need any help today?" "He's up at the third barn. He always appreciates some help on the weekends." The farm had a few ways to get around: 2 trucks, some tractors, and 3 off-road bikes. I knew how to ride from my days of speeding around with friends on small bikes, so I quickly put on a helmet and took off toward the barn. Bill was busy fixing some wooden boards. When he heard me coming, he paused to wipe his forehead with his sleeve. Taking the hammer and nails from him, I started to work. "Got some news for you, Mark?" "Yeah?" I replied, trying to hold nails in my mouth. "My daughter will be here in a couple of weeks. Usually we pick her up from the airport, but she's decided to drive home this time since she's coming back for good. I think I've seen her photo around the house. Her name's Catherine, but she likes to be called Kathy. I might not have told you that." I shrugged, unsure if I had heard about her. "Are you excited to see her?" "Of course. The house feels empty without my kids." "I know that feeling," I said quietly, then sighed. Don't worry, Mark. There's plenty of time." He cleared his throat. "Eli told me about your questions. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm sorry. I'm not great at understanding feelings, but Eli seems to know what's going on. Or at least, I think she does." I sighed again. "We're not going to pressure you, Mark. Believe me." "Trust? That's something I thought was gone," I whispered. "Thanks, Bill, for not pushing. You're a good person, Mark. Eli and I can see that. We just want to help." I stepped down from the ladder and looked into the distance at the shimmering heat. Even though it wasn't summer yet, it was already warm. Another hot summer was coming. This part of the country was just heat, and I could manage that. "I like it out here, Bill. It's calm. I don't want to sound all philosophical, but I feel like I might find some peace here. That was the hope anyway. It was either that or, well, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Finding peace sounds good, son, he said softly. We wrapped up for the day and headed back to the house. He offered me a drink. My stomach was still a bit uneasy, but it would have felt wrong to say no. I sat on the porch as Eli brought out a glass and joined her husband on the couch. The sun began to set, painting the sky in beautiful shades of red, orange, yellow, purple, and blue. It was enough to bring a tear to my eye. I sighed happily. I won't say I'm happy, I finally said. I'm not sure I'll feel that way again, but I can say that coming out here was the right choice. It won't be easy. There's a lot going on in my head. I tapped my temple, but I'll make a promise I can keep. I'll tell you everything when I'm ready. Whenever you are, Mark, we'll be ready too, Eli said. Kathy I had no problem singing along to the radio since I was the only car on the road. It had been a long drive from Brisbane, but I had wisely decided to split the trip into 2 days, leaving mid-morning on Saturday with plans to arrive in the afternoon. As I drove into the town of Longreach, a smile spread across my face. I knew home was only half an hour away, and I happily sang along to the radio. I was glad I was alone. My singing wasn't great, but it kept me entertained on the long drive. The farm was huge, and it took me about 20 minutes to go around the fence before I reached the entrance. The house looked just the same. Dad's truck was parked nearby. As I passed by, I honked the horn a couple of times. Then I stopped and got out, and there was Mum running towards me. "Kathy!" she shouted, nearly jumping into my arms. Her warm hug made me feel loved and missed. After I grabbed my bags from the trunk, we carried them inside and up to my old room. It had changed a bit over the years. Most of the posters were gone, and the walls had been painted in softer colors. The furniture looked nicer, too. After I placed my things on the bed, I looked around and felt a wave of happiness. It felt wonderful to be home. "Mom, I'm going to take a shower first. I really need one." "Everything is just as you remember," she called back. Mom had made sure the bathroom had a nice shower. Before stepping under the water, I looked at myself in the mirror. I had shoulder-length brown hair, brown eyes, and a few freckles on my nose. I didn't have a big chest like my mother, which meant guys didn't notice me too often. I stayed active, so my legs were toned. But I was single for a reason. Not many men were interested in coming out to a quiet farm. Sure, I had a boyfriend while I was at university, but most of those 3 years away from home, I was on my own. The shower felt refreshing after the long 12-hour drive. New underwear always felt nice, along with clean jeans, a cami, a flannel shirt, and my boots. When I walked downstairs, I heard Dad whistling, and Mom laughed at him. "Dinner will be at the usual time," she said. "Good. I'm starving. I haven't really eaten since breakfast," I replied, sitting across from Dad, who was focused on the paper. "Anything new around here?" I caught a glance between Mom and Dad. He cleared his throat. "Yes, there's a new guy working for us. He's been around for a few months. He works hard. He's polite. A good man." Standing up, I said, "I should go introduce myself. Is he around? Staying in one of the cabins?" "Just wait, sweetie," Mom said, sitting beside me. "It's a bit more complicated." "What do you mean?" "He's had some hard times," Mom said. "He hasn't shared much. From what we've heard, it seems he's been through a lot. He even asked me a few questions that made me think, I honestly don't know." "But what happened? Is he okay?" "I think something happened with his family," Mom replied, "and from what we heard, it might involve a child, too. That's just making guesses, trying to understand his life. Whatever the reason is, it brought him here to Longreach. I feel like he doesn't have anyone else," Dad added. "How about I invite him for dinner?" "He likes to be alone," Dad replied, "but that might not be good for him." I stood up. "Then I'm going to say hello and ask him to dinner. I can tell you all about what I've been doing, too." Mom and Dad exchanged worried looks. "Is he dangerous?" "To you? Not at all. I don't think he would hurt anyone." "To himself?" Dad shrugged. "Which cabin is he in, Dad?" "Number 2, he said with a sigh. I got into my car and drove along the path to the cabin. It had been empty for a few years after the last stockman left. Parking behind another truck, I stepped out and walked slowly to the door. The light was on inside, so I knocked gently. A young man answered the door. He looked a few years older than me, tall and strong. But when I looked into his blue eyes, I saw something different. There was a depth there, as if he had many unshared stories. I cleared my throat. "Hello, I'm Kathy," I said, extending my hand. He hesitated a moment, but then shook my hand. "Mark," he replied quietly. "I just got back from university and we're having dinner. Would you like to join us?" He scratched his cheek and glanced inside the cabin before sighing. To my surprise, he said, "Sure, give me a moment to put on some boots." "I'll wait here," I replied. He nodded and closed the door. I guessed he wanted some time. A few minutes later, he came back wearing a long-sleeved shirt and boots. He got into the passenger seat of my car as I drove us back to the homestead. I glanced at him, but he was looking out the window, lost in thought. I knew Mom and Dad were right. I had seen similar signs before. He was hurting inside. When we arrived at the homestead, I got out and led him inside, where Mom had set the table. She smiled at me and then at Mark, her smile staying even though I noticed a hint of worry in her eyes. I knew Mom well. She always showed her feelings. "Thank you for coming, Mark." "You're welcome. Celebrating Kathy's return?" "Something like that. None of the other farmhands are here, so it's usually just the three of us or four if her brother is around. Why don't you sit down? Dinner will be ready soon." "Bill?" "Yeah?" he called from the kitchen. "Can you get Kathy and Mark a drink? Still enjoying beer, Kathy? Or have you moved on to something else?" I laughed lightly. "Something else? Where did you hear that?" "I've heard about the fancy drinks in city bars. What happened to simple beer, spirits, and wine?" I looked at Mark, who was still quiet. He nodded at my dad as he came in with a cold beer. "Thanks, Bill." "You're welcome." I settled into my chair and looked at Mark. He picked at the label on his beer bottle, looking deep in thought. I wondered if he was really thinking about anything. "Are you enjoying your life here, Mark?" I finally asked, breaking the quiet. "It's different," he answered shortly. "Different from Sydney?" "It's quiet here. I like the quiet." "How did you get here?" "I left Sydney and drove west, then turned north. After a couple of days, I got to Longreach. It felt like a good place to stop. Then someone told me about this place." He looked up and met my eyes. "Your parents are good people." "They are." He nodded, but then looked away again. Just then, Mom and Dad came in with plates of food, roast chicken, roast potatoes, and vegetables. Mom mentioned dessert would be coming too. I noticed Mark waited for everyone to serve themselves before filling his own plate. He definitely had a big appetite, finishing his meal quickly, and Mom laughed as he went back for more. "It would only go to waste if not eaten," she said, and Mark gave the smallest smile. Mom asked me about university, what I learned, and what I graduated with. I stole glances at Mark, who was busy eating but seemed to be listening. I wasn't upset that my parents couldn't attend my graduation. They worked hard on the farm, and taking a day off was tough. It was all right. What mattered was that I was home and ready to help out. "Still interested in some hard work?" Dad asked. "I'll get my hands dirty, Dad. You know I like it." "I'll help you get back into it. You need to build some muscle on those arms." I stayed fit at the gym. Mom had made cheesecake. When I looked at Mark again, I saw a spark of emotion on his face. "This is fantastic," he said, sounding pleased. I glanced at Mom, who was blinking back tears. "Thank you, Mark," she whispered. After dinner, we moved to the living room for drinks. Mom and Dad sat on the couch, Mark took a chair, and I sat across from him. We talked about life, but Mark didn't say much. He seemed okay to be with us, but I could feel my parents' worries about him. There was no happiness in Mark. He seemed to be just going through the motions, existing but not really living. I sensed this after just a few hours, while my parents had been dealing with it for months. When he finally left, he politely said goodnight. I offered to drive him home, but he said no, saying the fresh night air would be nice and it wasn't far to walk. When he disappeared, I rested my elbows on my knees. "Wow," I said softly. "I think I've never met anyone so troubled before. His presence." "Don't push him," Mum said gently. "If we do, he might pull away even more. He's slowly starting to open up, and I believe he needs to. Whatever weight he carries, it seems to trouble him a lot." That night, I lay in bed, thinking about the young man living with us on the farm. He could have stayed in the house, but Mom and Dad thought he would refuse. They were worried about him being on his own, but they couldn't make him stay. They knew he drank, as we found empty bottles in the recycling, but he always started work on time and did a good job. Dad had taken him out around the farm that week with one of the trucks to fix the fence. He brought camping gear, as he might be gone for several days. Mom was managing our money, which would become my main task later, and trying to get better deals with suppliers. They often tried to charge us more, so we pushed back as much as we could. At the end of a long week, Dad and I would sit on the porch to enjoy a drink before dinner. We hadn't seen Mark since he left, but I thought he might have come back and gone to his cabin. When I walked there, I saw his truck parked outside, so I assumed he'd returned. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer, so I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked, so I peeked inside. "Mark, are you here?" Then I noticed all the pictures. I stepped in and saw photos on the walls, little pictures on the table, and one on the mantel. I picked it up and saw him with a cute little blonde girl who looked about 5 years old. She was so sweet, and he was beaming with joy. The man in the photo seemed so different from the man living with us now. "What are you doing?" a loud voice called. I turned to see Mark in the doorway. It was the first time I'd really seen him, and he looked angry. My hand shook as I held the picture. "Is this your daughter, Mark?" "What are you doing?" he growled, walking closer. "Why are you in my cabin? Why do you have that picture?" He stepped right up to me, towering over me with his broad shoulders. It felt a bit scary. He reached for the picture, and I handed it to him. As he looked at it, his face changed completely. His eyes became shiny, and he gently ran his fingers over the glass. I was shocked to see tears rolling down his cheeks as he hugged the picture and turned away from me. Without thinking, I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mark." I was surprised he didn't shrug me off. Instead, he seemed to relax. "Sorry for shouting at you," he whispered. "Please, just go." I hurried past him and ran home, but now I understood so much more. When I dashed inside, Mom was standing in the kitchen doorway. "Kathy?" I stopped and started to cry. I barely knew Mark, but seeing him change when he held that picture was deeply moving. Mom hugged me tightly. "You were looking around, weren't you?" "I didn't mean to. I was just going to ask him to join Dad and me for a drink." I sniffled. "His door was open. I thought he was resting. That's when I saw all the—" She stopped me. "I don't need to hear it. It's his business." "I messed things up, Mom." Mom sighed. "Just give him some space," she said gently. "We can't rush this. We're not doctors, but he was starting to open up. We just need to wait a little longer before he trusts us again. I'm sorry. I think you should say sorry to him, not me, Kathy. Go see him tomorrow and ask him to join us for breakfast." Mark I woke up with a bad headache, holding the picture frame and noticing an empty bottle on the floor. I couldn't remember much about the day before, but I had to get my mind clear. As I was gathering my thoughts, I remembered Kathy being in my cabin. After rinsing my mouth, I looked in the mirror. "What a mess," I said softly. I had a choice to make. I could either pack my bags and leave or finally talk to someone about what happened. I liked Bill and Eli. I understood Kathy's curiosity, and I had noticed she was a pretty young woman. I bet she was shocked when she found me the day before. It was surprising to see her there, holding that picture, and then realizing what it meant. My cabin probably looked like a tribute to my daughter. It felt like it. She would always be in my heart, but I felt a bit lost without her. I was pulled from my thoughts by a light knock on the door. I opened it to find Kathy standing there. Her eyes went wide when she saw I was only in my underwear. I almost smiled at how surprised she looked, but she didn't look away. "Mark, I'm sorry," she said. "Would you like to join me for breakfast?" "You're sorry?" "For coming in without asking and for being too curious. I shouldn't have entered your space. I'm really sorry." I couldn't help but notice how eager she was to apologize. "Give me 5 minutes, okay?" She smiled slightly. "Okay." I quickly got dressed and went to the living room, looking at the picture frame. Kathy had figured it out. I didn't confirm it, but it was clear the photo was of me and my daughter. I sighed and hid the picture behind me as I joined Kathy outside. We walked back to the farm in silence until I stopped her a little way ahead. "You don't need to say sorry," I told her. "I do. I shouldn't have. I raised my hand. I know your parents want to understand. They've been kind to me. But I'm not sure how to explain everything. I looked into her eyes. Kathy, they changed my life completely. All of them. She took my hand and squeezed it gently. Will you feel better if you talk about it? I don't know. I feel embarrassed. I'm really angry. I'm in pain. I sighed. Telling her that I wanted to escape from everything most of the day felt wrong, but it was honest. She squeezed my hand again and led me to her family's farm. Eli was happy to see me and gave me a hug. I won't lie, I started to enjoy her hugs. It had been a long time since I felt any warmth from my own family. My connection with them was tough, but I was trying to find my way through it. She happened to be there when I was struggling. We sat down at the kitchen table where Eli served us bacon, sausages, eggs, and hash browns. We ate quietly, sipping coffee or tea, and then I asked the three of them to meet me in the living room. As they left, I took a moment to collect my thoughts before following them. I took a seat in a chair and pulled a photo from my bag. With a heavy sigh, I turned it around and handed it to Bill and Eli. She took it, and I could see her eyes fill with tears. "You do smile," she whispered softly. Catherine Katie Sally Samuels was born 5 years, 9 months, and 23 days ago. She is my daughter. The last time I saw her was the Sunday night before I left Sydney. I worked as a civil engineer, mainly on roads. When I came home on Friday night, the house was empty. My fiancé and daughter were gone, and there was a note saying they left and that I would never see them again. Before I go on, I should share a bit about my past. The people I used to call my parents are very wealthy. "Feel free to share your thoughts," Bill said. I managed a small smile, probably the most I had in months. "Well, my dad made his money as a partner at a law firm, and my mom is a doctor with a busy practice. Growing up in the fancy eastern suburbs of Sydney, I was surrounded by people who thought they were better than everyone else. I got along okay with my sister Kelly, but my brother Brian and my parents were tough to handle. School was terrible for me. I hated every second of it. They pushed me into things I didn't want to do. I wanted to play rugby league, but my dad was against it. He never backed me, but a friend helped me out, and I still played. My parents wanted me to get good grades and go to university, but that never appealed to me. I was skilled with my hands and good at subjects like woodwork and metalwork. I aimed to work in engineering, and I succeeded while working. As soon as I finished high school, I left home fast and found a job. I started at the bottom, worked hard, and eventually moved up while studying. Around that time, I met Sally at a pub, and we clicked right away. By the time I turned 20, I had my own small apartment, and Katie had just arrived. Life felt good, and we were a strong team. But slowly, my parents began to get involved in our lives, which caused some tension. I saw Sally change, probably because of them. Even with our arguments, I still believed she loved me and appreciated our life together. When I came home to find our apartment empty, I was stunned. The letter from Sally showed that she had already made up her mind. I sensed something wasn't right, but I was focused on taking care of my family. What I discovered in the next few hours broke my heart. I reached out to some old friends to talk about everything that had happened, and I was let down to find out they hadn't been truthful with me. They knew what was going on, but didn't say anything. Next, I went to visit my family. I still can't believe what they told me. They had introduced Sally to someone else a year before and said I wasn't fit to provide for her. Their words made my feelings of loss and betrayal even deeper. This new person was someone rich, and I felt they did this as a way to punish me for not doing what they wanted. John never shared his name or where they had gone. By the time I was done talking to him, he was out cold. I told my family exactly how I felt about them. I haven't seen or heard from them since. I spent a night in jail because the police were waiting for me at home. I was surprised that I didn't face any charges. I would have accepted some time in jail. I had been waiting for years to confront that man. After all that, I had to leave Sydney. I had no partner, no daughter, no family, and no friends. So I sold my apartment, got rid of everything I didn't need, quit my job, and hit the road as soon as I could. That's how I ended up here. I finally looked up. Eli was crying. Kathy was nearly in tears. Even Bill had tears in his eyes. "I'm still looking for her. The police haven't helped much. I call them every week and they say there's no news. Sometimes I think they don't care. or they think I'm responsible for everything that happened. I hired a private investigator to look into it for me, but so far I've heard nothing. He's not optimistic. I'm not either, but I won't give up. My daughter is out there somewhere. She was 5 years old at that time. She's old enough to remember me when she grows up, but I'm sure they're telling her things like, "Daddy didn't love you." That kind of manipulation. I know my little girl, though. She knew her daddy loved her. He will always love her, no matter how far apart we are. I took a sip of my beer. Every day I go between two big thoughts. The first is that I just want to give up and stop the hurt. What's the point of going on? I've lost everything, and the only thing that truly mattered was my daughter. For my own flesh and blood to take that from me. There are no words to explain that. The second thing is that there is always hope, no matter what. Hope is what keeps me from giving up. "If you give up, you'll never see her again," Kathy whispered. "I'm hopeful, but I also know the truth, Kathy. The world is so big. Where could they have gone? Honestly, anywhere. I think it's fair to say they would likely go to a country where people speak English, but that still leaves so many places to search." We sat quietly for a few minutes. "Your own parents," Bill said quietly, shaking his head. "They never wanted me to follow my own path. The truth is, I was a good kid. Mostly. I got good grades and rarely caused trouble at school, even though I didn't like where they sent me. Sure, I showed my older brother who was in charge a few times, but other than that, I did what I wanted. I just wanted the usual support from them while chasing my dreams. But because I wouldn't follow their plans," I let out a bitter laugh. "They never liked Sally, I know that for sure. So her being gone feels like killing two birds with one stone. They never really cared about Katie either. I can't say I understand their thinking. Now John and Cheryl are nothing to me. I feel like an orphan at 25. I stood up and sighed. I need some fresh air. I stepped outside alone and took in the view. The sun had already risen. It was going to be another hot day. The sky was clear. The insects were buzzing, but it was mostly quiet. I had come to enjoy this peace. It was so different from the city, where there was always noise. I suddenly felt someone next to me and turned to see Kathy. She looked at me and then hugged me, resting her head against my chest. I wrapped my arms around her and closed my eyes, just feeling grateful for the moment. "Want to cry?" she asked gently. "I'm all cried out, Kathy. Right now I'm just empty. I can't even get mad. I'm sorry for raising my voice at you yesterday. I just wasn't ready to talk about it. But this morning, you figured it out. I don't think of you as a gossip, but I knew it might come out somehow. I had to face it head on. How do you feel?" "Like I've lost everything. But at least I feel something." I leaned back. "So, what do you think?" "I know you love your daughter deeply, and that's what really matters. Forget about all those other people. They're not worth your time." She took my hand and squeezed it gently. "You have us now, Mark, if you want to stay a little longer. I just opened up to you. There's no way I'm going to just leave after that. Your parents are good people. They remind me of friends' parents, the kind that truly love and care for their kids and don't use them for their own needs." She laughed softly at that. "Actually, I should say thank you." "For what?" "It wasn't the best way to do it, but it helped me. I've been feeling sad and stuck for months." "That's understandable given everything you've been through. I just want to see my daughter again. But while I hold on to hope that I will, there's a part of me that knows I need to move on and live my life. So I'll keep living. I won't forget her, but I need to find a way to pick up the pieces and carry on." Eli and Bill showed up. Eli gave me a long hug. "You're a good man, and I believe you would have been a great father," she whispered. Her words really touched me, and I shed a few more tears. "You've hugged me more since I got here than I've had in a long time." She shushed me and held me tighter. "Thank you," I finally said. I had been holding on to all of that for months. Letting it all out felt freeing. Bill, Eli, and Kathy had only heard my side, but I hoped they believed me. Since I had arrived in such a daze, it was clear I had been through a lot. But after this, I felt a bit better about life. Over the next couple of weeks, I noticed changes in myself and the others. I wouldn't say I smiled, but I felt lighter. I still couldn't remember the last time I laughed. What I saw was Kathy coming to get me for breakfast each morning. I started to see her differently. She seemed to really care about me. After all I'd been through, it was hard to believe her kindness. Eli greeted me with a hug every morning. One day, when I hugged her back, she began to cry. When I asked her why, she told me not to worry. Bill and I worked in the summer heat. I had missed shearing season, which Bill said only happened once a year in spring. He said I could try it next time if I wanted. We moved the cattle and sheep around and took care of general tasks. Sometimes I took breaks from the farm and enjoyed camping. Kathy taught me a few horseback riding skills, and honestly, I felt like a real cowboy as I rode a few kilometers away to check the fences. Mark, have you been into town at all since you've been here, other than shopping? Kathy asked one Friday night at dinner. I shook my head. Would you like to join some friends and me at the RSL on Saturday? I looked into her eyes, surprised by the hopeful look in hers. Honestly, I haven't really left the farm much, but yes, I'd love to. Great! It's a date! Eli laughed, and Kathy started to blush and looked away. I chuckled, which surprised everyone. Kathy stared at me until I smiled back at her. It felt strange to smile again. Then I was hugged by both Eli and Kathy. He smiles, Eli whispered. And laughs, Kathy added softly. I was a bit nervous the next day. I had nervously chewed my nails, so much that Bill took the hammer from my hand and told me it was best to go back to my cabin. He said I might hurt myself or him if I kept working. Get ready for your date, he called as I walked to my truck, chuckling to himself. I took a shower first, then picked out my clothes, nice clean jeans and a good short-sleeved shirt. I thought Kathy liked a bit of stubble, so I used an electric razor to keep it short. I put on some cologne and deodorant. I grabbed my boots and a light jacket, as the evenings could still be cool even in summer. When I arrived at the homestead, Eli asked me to wait in the living room. Bill handed me a drink while I waited for Kathy. She didn't keep me waiting long. She walked down the stairs in a lovely red summer dress that stopped just above her knees. She wore sensible shoes. The sunlight coming through the windows made her sun-kissed skin shine. She had on a bit of makeup and her hair looked nice. I stood there for a moment, surprised, which made her giggle. Ready, Mark? Yeah. Are you okay to drive us, Dad? And pick you up, too. No driving home after drinking. Call us whenever you want. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Dad. Bill turned on the air conditioning as we got into his truck. It was a single cab, so I sat on the left, Kathy in the middle, and Bill in the driver's seat. As we drove, I felt Kathy leaning against me and glanced over at her more than once. She just stared out the front window. I raised my right arm and she leaned in closer. I glanced at Bill, who nodded at me. The RSL wasn't the biggest place I'd been in, and soon I met Kathy's friends, 4 couples. When they asked who I was, she quickly said, Mark is my date for the evening. We enjoyed a meal before heading to the bar. The food was pretty good for a country RSL, simple but well-cooked and tasty. When I offered to pay for Kathy, she smiled. Then she left a light kiss on my cheek, which made me blush. It had been a long time since I felt something like that. In the bar later, Kathy made sure to sit next to me, getting closer. I saw her friends looking at me with curiosity and approval. I gave a slight shrug in return. She was a lovely woman, but also the daughter of my boss. I felt like I had to be careful. Plus, I still felt broken inside. What could she possibly see in me? As the night went on, the conversation flowed easily. One of the guys told a funny story about his farm, and it had a great punchline. I laughed loudly. It felt good to laugh, and I noticed everyone looking at me. That laughter opened up feelings I had kept hidden for a long time. Before I realized it, I felt Kathy's comforting hug, and I had to wipe my eyes to gather my thoughts. I'm sorry, I said softly. She smiled kindly at me. It's okay, let it out. With everything you've been through, it's natural to feel this way. I cleared my throat and dried my eyes with a napkin, then looked around the table. Great first impression, huh? I got a few awkward smiles in response. All right, let me get some drinks and then I'll explain what just happened. Mark, you don't have to. It'll feel good to get it out, Kathy, I replied, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. Plus, I should probably tell them why a big farmer like me got a bit emotional. After getting drinks, I sat back down next to Kathy. I pulled out my wallet, took a picture from it, and handed it to Emily across the table. She looked at it and smiled. That's my daughter, Katie. I then shared my story again, more briefly this time, just the main points. Kathy held my hand the whole time, leaning close to me. I answered a few questions to clarify things, and then Ben asked, "So, do you know where she is?" "No, not at all. The police haven't helped. No sign of her or my daughter. They can't even tell me if they are in the country. They think they aren't, but I feel like I'm on my own. It's like they don't care. Part of me thinks they blame me. I stopped using the private investigator a couple of weeks ago because it was costing me too much with little to show for it. It wasn't his fault. He had almost no information to work with. He said he'd let me know if he found anything, but it feels hopeless. I don't know enough about the law or my options. I just have hope left." Thankfully, my story didn't ruin the mood, and when the place was about to close, we called Bill to pick us up. The guys shook my hand, and all of Kathy's friends hugged me tightly, wishing me well. We were the last ones there when Bill arrived. When we got back to the farm, he drove me right to my cabin. "Thanks, Bill." I cleared my throat and asked, "Kathy, do you want a nightcap? I can walk you home afterward." She kissed her dad's cheek. "Good night, Dad," she said before getting out. "Have fun, kids," he replied as he drove away. I scratched my head, a bit confused by his comment. Once inside the cabin, I turned on the light and held the door open for Kathy as she came in. I took her hand gently since she looked a bit nervous. "You're invited this time," I whispered, giving it a little squeeze. "Come on, I'll show you some photos." They were special to me, memories from birthdays, starting preschool, and the first day of primary school. I had printed out some photos I had saved on my phone. I could clearly remember the day and everything we were doing in each photo. Kathy seemed impressed. "She's my daughter," I said. "I remember every little thing. I might even remember too much. I have 5 years of memories stored right here," I added, tapping my head. I then cleared my throat. Drink." Kathy kept holding my hand and turned me to face her. A smile began to form as I looked into her eyes. "You look quite nice, Mark. I'm glad you kept the stubble." I sighed. "Kathy," she hugged me tightly. "I'm here because I want to be, Mark. Isn't that what matters? I just don't know anymore." She lifted her head and rested her chin on my chest. "All I know is that the next woman you love, if you love her even half as much as your daughter, will be the happiest woman ever." She raised a hand to my chest. "You are a good man, Mark. Everyone sees how much you love your daughter. You work hard on the farm every day. It's tough work, but you never complain. You're kinder than you think." I gave her a light kiss. I liked her and found her attractive, and if... All thoughts stopped when she kissed me back, and I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. She smelled nice, a lovely mix of her perfume and her natural scent. When we finally leaned back, I whispered, "Stay the night, just to sleep. I can get you one of my shirts." "I wasn't planning on leaving until tomorrow morning," she replied with a smile. I chuckled, holding her closer. "I wasn't planning on letting you leave until then either," I admitted, and she giggled. I found a large shirt for her, and I watched her go into the small bathroom while I quickly changed and got under the blankets. She came out after a few minutes, having washed her face. The shirt was long enough to cover her. She looked beautiful. Her eyes sparkled in the soft light as she joined me in bed, settling right against me. She giggled. "Happy to see me, Mark?" "I am now." She noticed the picture on the side table. "How old is she there?" 4, I said, wrapping an arm around her waist, feeling her head rest under my chin. "Last thing I see before I sleep and the first thing I see when I wake up." I paused, needing to admit, "It's a reminder that I want to live another day." She gently picked up the picture and held it up for me. "Kiss her goodnight, Mark." I did, and then Kathy kissed it too. "Good night, Katie. Daddy still loves you," she whispered, placing the picture back down. Kathy turned to hug me for a few minutes. "Mark, listen to me," she whispered. "You have plenty to live for. You have my mom and dad. They care about you a lot. I can see it. And you have me. I'm not going anywhere. All I want is to take this gentle giant in bed and look after him, just like I know he would do for me and his daughter." I kissed her softly, feeling a nice connection. She smiled and said, "Finally, you kissed me like that. I've noticed how you look at me, Mark. It's awkward. Dad really likes you, Mark, and Mom loves you. They're better parents than mine," I said quietly. "So we will be your family," she whispered back. "Or at least, parents-in-law." "And you?" I asked, looking into her eyes. "Girlfriend," she answered simply, stroking my cheek. "I see a spark in your blue eyes, Mark. I've been waiting to see that. I know it will take time, but I want to see the man from those photos. Maybe one day he will look at me like that, too?" She snuggled closer as I leaned over to turn off the lamp. Holding her gently, she stayed very still until I felt her breathing change and she fell asleep. A big smile spread across my face in the dark. I was feeling joy. I was also feeling sadness and anger about everything I had been through. But I was ready to feel again. Talking with her parents meant I had to stop hiding from my feelings, and that led me to realize something else. I was already falling for her. She was beautiful, smart, funny, and she seemed to like me back. I thought her feelings were stronger than just liking me. I wasn't fully ready for that yet, but I liked her. I trusted her, and she accepted me with all my flaws. I'm not sure how long it took for me to fall asleep, but when I woke up the next morning, I felt soft fingers on my cheek. I opened my eyes to see her smiling at me. We exchanged warm smiles. As the morning went on, she said, "Mark, I want one thing today." She had a playful look in her eyes. We laughed and enjoyed ourselves as we headed to the shower, keeping the fun conversation going. "Shower?" I asked. "Then breakfast. Be ready for questions or more teasing." We walked hand in hand to the farmhouse. Eli and Bill were already at the breakfast table. They looked at us and shared an amused look. After breakfast plates were set in front of us, Eli sat down and cleared his throat. "Mark, we think you should move in," he said. "What?" "We see how you both feel about each other. We don't want to make you uncomfortable, but aren't you tired of being alone?" I looked at Kathy, and she met my gaze with a smile. When I smiled back, she squeezed my hand, and I loved how soft her hand felt in mine. "Yeah, I guess I am," I replied softly. "Kathy?" her mother asked. "I'm tired of sleeping alone. It would be nice to have a big teddy bear with me." I looked at her parents. "Are you really okay with this?" Eli chuckled quietly to herself at my question. "Mark, you're 25, right?" I nodded. "My daughter is 21. You're both adults. More importantly, you make my daughter happy. If making her happy means you staying here, then that's good. We also want you to be here with us." I looked at Bill first. He smiled at me. Then I looked back at Eli. "I wish my parents." She leaned over and kissed my cheek. "Let me take care of you," she whispered. "I've been doing that since you got here. Now we can just say it, and I can keep showing you the care I want to give. I'll move my things after breakfast." Packing up my cabin took less than half an hour. I made sure to take everything. Moving my things into Kathy's room, I found her room wasn't as crowded as I thought it would be. Since there was an extra room, her brother's old room, they suggested I put my clothes there to make more space. Kathy took the photo of my daughter and me from the mantel in my cabin, saying it would go downstairs. When I had almost finished packing, I asked her to meet me downstairs with her parents. Before she left, I said something. "I'm going to worry you, but you might already know." I took a bag out of my backpack and opened it to show a gun. I had learned how to take it apart and put it back together. It was pretty simple with only a few moving parts. After that, I took a deep breath and went downstairs. The three of them were waiting at the dining table. Kathy looked nervous while her parents were curious. I took each piece out of the bag. It was clear what they were looking at. They stayed silent, waiting for me to explain. I left Sydney because my life there was over. I came all this way wanting to end it. I bought this gun illegally. You might want me to leave now, but I have to tell you this. I came here to end my life. Kathy took my right hand. Eli took my left hand. The first couple of months were the hardest. I had two thoughts in my head. I want to end my life, but I also want to see my daughter again. Every evening back in that cabin, I would sit on the couch with three things on the table: a picture of my daughter, a bottle of liquor, and the gun. I could probably put it together with my eyes closed by now. I didn't want it to jam when I had to make an important choice. I had thoughts I wasn't proud of, but the only thing that kept me going was knowing that if I ended my life, my daughter would have no father. That idea kept me holding on. I looked up, and Kathy let go of my hand for a moment so I could wipe my eyes. Then after a couple of months, I had three thoughts. I still wanted to end my life. I still wanted to see my daughter. But I didn't want Eli or Bill to find me like that. I couldn't do that to them. They took me into their family and treated me like one of their own. Bill was the father I wished I had when I was growing up. Eli was the mother I wished I had, showing me more kindness in a short time than I had received in years. Leaving them to search for me wouldn't be fair. I looked at Kathy. "You came home, Kathy. After knowing you for just a little while, I had a few new thoughts. The last one made me want to live again. I realized I didn't want to die anymore. I wanted to see my daughter. I wanted to stay here with Eli and Bill, and I wanted to see if you would like to know the real me, not just the empty man you first met. When I had that thought, I took apart the gun and hid it one last time, but I knew I had to be honest with the three of you. I had a sense of what you were dealing with, son. I told Eli that when you first arrived. I'm not angry, nor is Eli. We couldn't understand your pain fully, but we could see it was deep. What you shared with us that night confirmed what we felt." Kathy stood up and motioned for me to shift back. She sat close, resting her head on my chest. I looked at Bill. "Please, hide this somewhere I can't find it, Bill. I don't want it anymore. I don't want to die. Everything I need is right here. I have both of you, and I hope I can have Kathy, too." "You do," she whispered softly. "Then there's only one thing missing. We all know what that is. I'm a patient man. It will happen someday. I won't give up, but—" I sighed. "I just don't know if I have other choices." "I'll ask someone else to take it away and bury it deep," Bill promised. "Thank you, and I'm sorry." "No need for that," Eli said. "What you just told us was brave, Mark. You could have kept it to yourself. It took courage to admit something like that. It took guts, son. Thank you for trusting us. I thought I would never trust anyone again after everything. Coming here was the best choice I could make. Thank you because you three saved me, not just for me but for my daughter. All I ask is that you look after mine in return, Mark. I'll spend my life doing that, Bill." Kathy looked into my eyes and smiled. "You seem serious, Mark." "I am serious," I replied. The smile that lit up her face made her look more beautiful than I ever imagined. "I love you." We shared a special moment, and when we pulled apart, her parents had slipped away. She took me upstairs, closed the door, and made sure I was comfortable before leaning against me. I sighed, feeling at peace. "I feel good," I said. Sharing that felt good. I was aware of what might happen, but after your kindness, it felt like a weight was lifted. The only feeling I have now is hope, Kathy. I hope to see her again. You will, Mark. Somehow you'll find each other." 5 years later, Kathy Mark never checked his social media. He kept it mainly for the small chance that his daughter might find him there someday. I knew everything about him now, of course. He was my husband, and I was his wife. There were no secrets between us. Mark still had tough days, but we didn't hold that against him, and neither did our parents. After all he had been through, he carried scars that would last forever. Since the day I told him I loved him and we got married, I promised to support and care for him always. We worked on the farm together. Mark enjoyed spending time with my dad and the others. He loved trimming sheep during the busy season, earning good money as he traveled to nearby farms. He would usually be away for a month, but he called me every night. Sometimes we just chatted, and other times he just wanted to hear my voice. He also made sure to talk to our son, who was now 2 years old. I knew I might have had another baby sooner if I hadn't been on birth control. Once Mark started to feel better, he was truly a joy to be around. I loved seeing the light come back into his eyes and how warmly he looked at me. As I thought about this, I gently touched my belly. We already knew we were having a girl. Mark felt mixed emotions when we found out, happy but also a bit guilty. I told him our daughter was not a replacement. Katie was still out there, still his child. Throughout everything, he never lost hope, even though he had not found her yet. He wished for a miracle and kept searching. My parents were very affectionate with our son. Bill and Mark had grown very close, with Mark calling him Dad and my mom being called Mum. The first time he called her that, she hugged him tightly, and they both had tears of joy. We all knew he had a special love for them, but there was one person he couldn't forget. I had hinted at this since our son was born, but Mark had not said much. He was careful with his words, trying not to upset me. Mark wasn't active on social media, but I kept an eye on it for him, knowing it was a way for Katie to reach out. Since he had been away, his sister had sent messages every week. Each one seemed heartfelt, full of sadness, always ending with love and hope that he would reply one day. No other family members contacted him. Some friends asked about him, but he had told me to keep details to a minimum, just that he was okay, without saying where he lived or that he was married. He went by Mark Samuels online, a name he didn't like anymore. Kelly had sent another message just the day before. I looked at her profile. She was pretty and didn't seem to have children. Mark's brother was on the site too, but Mark had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with him, saying he had no brother and new parents. It made me sad to remember how he described himself as a 25-year-old orphan. I decided I wouldn't reach out without talking to Mark first. He knew about Kelly's messages, but he didn't say much. He was always nice, but I sensed he felt bad about the tough things he had said to hurt his sister before. At dinner that night, after we finished eating, I turned to him. He was now 30 years old, fit and looking better than ever. His blue eyes shone when he looked at me. "Mark, can we talk about something?" I asked. "Sure," he replied. "It's about your sister, Kelly." I watched his face. It was hard to read. "She still sends a message every week. It's been 5 years. I think I should reach out for you." He stood up slowly. "Excuse me for a moment," he said softly. "Mark?" I called after him. He bent down to assure me, "I'm not upset, sweetheart. I just need a moment to think." "Okay. I love you. I love you too." He always left the room with those words. When he stepped outside, Mom looked at me, knowing this topic might bring up old feelings for him. I thought maybe this was a chance for him to reconnect with Kelly. He came back with drinks, and we all sat quietly as he thought. At last, he nodded. "Okay, send her a simple message. Let her know who you are. Ask her what she wants. I'll start a conversation when I see her online. Is there anything specific you want to find out?" "Not really, but if she's serious, we might need to meet in person. Not here, though. I won't go back to Sydney. How about Brisbane?" "That sounds good. But first, let's see how serious she is. You're good at figuring people out. I just can't do it myself. Is it okay if I reach out soon? Like pulling off a Band-Aid, fast and easy." I waited until the next evening to see if she would be online. When the little symbol lit up green, I opened a chat window and began to type. Marks. "Hello, Kelly. Sam. Mark? Oh my God, I never thought, it's not Mark, Kelly, this is Catherine, Kathy. I'm his wife. K. Mark's married? Oh, hi, Kathy. So I guess you know who I am. I know you're his sister. Mark doesn't really use social media, but he left this page for people to reach out. I've seen how often you message him. He finally agreed to talk since he's curious why you keep messaging. He thought he made his feelings clear. He had told me all about what happened that day at the house, what he said and what she said back. He admitted that the longer it went on, the more he regretted his words to her. He still had no feelings for the others, but hinted that maybe, one day, he'd get in touch with her. Before I continue, Kelly, I need to ask something. This will decide if we keep talking, so you must be honest. How much do you know about what happened, Kay? Honestly, not a lot. But I couldn't ever tell him because my parents said they would cut me off if I did. But I wanted to tell him. I never agreed with what happened. When he went missing, everything fell apart. I feel angry with my parents for what they did to him. I always cared about him the most. Do you know where his daughter is? Kay. If I knew, I would have posted it on his page, Kathy. They never told me everything, and I can't figure it out on my own. I leaned back and she sounded honest, but reading words is not the same as hearing them. What she said matched the posts she made on his page for the last 5 years. Kelly, I have to be honest. What your family and his friends did really hurt him. He was in a very hard place for months. The only thing that helped him was thinking about seeing his daughter, my parents, and then me, Kay. A hard place? She added a lot of crying emojis. I totally understood how much pain that brought. Yes, that's what everyone made him feel. While I want to believe you, I need to feel your sadness and care. We need to talk. I need to hear your voice. Mark isn't ready to talk yet. Getting him to let me message you was a big deal, Kay. But he did let you, so that means there's a chance, right? There is a chance, but my parents and I really protect him. He has been through too much. I'm going to leave my phone number. Please call me tomorrow night. As I said, Mark isn't ready to chat, but I'm willing to listen. If you convince me, I'll ask my husband if he wants to talk. K. I'm really happy he has found some joy, Kathy. Thank you for taking care of him. M. Your brother is a good man and he cares about me deeply. Here's my number. Please call around 7 p.m. and we can talk things over. K. I will definitely call. I want to hear his voice again, but thank you, Kathy, for letting me try. I'll log off now or I'll end up asking too many questions. One thing, though. Please tell him I still love him. I miss my brother. M. I'll tell him, Kelly. Talk to you tomorrow. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the conversation. Mark was lying quietly beside me. I could tell it was on his mind at breakfast the next morning. His parents noticed too, but didn't ask. Before he left with my dad, he kissed me, told me he loved me, and said everything was okay. He wouldn't listen in on the call, but he would want to hear about it afterward. Whatever I said, he would believe it, and we could go from there. I felt a little nervous as the time got closer. I hoped I wasn't digging up old wounds. Mark said he was as happy as he could be, even with someone still missing, but he tried not to think about it. He focused on the present and the hope for the future. There's nothing we can do about the past now. At exactly 7 p.m., my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I had a feeling I knew who it was. When I answered, I heard a shaky hello. When she heard my voice, she started to cry. In that moment, I felt sorry for her. She really cared about her brother, missed him, and felt bad about what happened. I waited for her to calm down before asking some simple questions about her life, helping her feel comfortable talking to me before getting to the main issue. Can you tell me about that day, Kelly? The day he came to the house? I heard her take a deep breath. I had never seen Mark so upset before. The anger in his eyes when he walked into the backyard to face our parents was clear. My parents? That's an interesting way to put it. Oh, they are not really his anymore, Kathy. I know he doesn't feel anything for them now. His picture is gone from the house. My dad still regrets not following through on his threats. But the threat is still there. Mark made him afraid. I see. Mark is usually gentle, but some people can really push his buttons. She cleared her throat. We all knew about it, Kathy. He was always around. His name was Tony. I never found out his last name. He and Sally were together from almost the start. My parents set it all up. Since Mark usually stayed home with Katie while Sally visited, he had no idea what was going on. When Mark did come home, Tony was there but kept his distance. Anyway, on that day, Mark came in ready to explode. When Dad confirmed what happened, Mark lost it. I think Mark had been waiting for years to confront him. He wouldn't have confronted my mom because he would never hurt a woman. I knew he would have faced Brian if he had the chance, but Brian was scared of him. That night, everything was revealed. Mark finally saw our family for what they were. And he called me a worthless person. He feels bad about that, Kelly. I promise he does. But I deserved it. I was part of it. I didn't want to be, but I was. I never told him because I was too scared of losing everything I had. I watched my brother's life fall apart because of cruel parents, a mean fiancé, and a terrible man she left with. I never thought she would take Katie, but I knew my parents didn't really like Sally. This was their way of pushing her out. They didn't care much about Katie anyway, and it felt like revenge against Mark for living his life how he wanted. Your parents sound terrible, Kelly. I hate them now, she whispered. They pushed him away, and I helped. Kelly started to cry again. I gave her a moment to gather herself. What happened next? Slowly, people found out what happened. It took time, but I helped spread the news to ease my own guilt. Rumors started about how they treated my brother. Once people noticed Mark was gone, they began to put things together. No Mark, no Sally, no Katie. Dad almost lost his job when his company found out what happened. Mom's practice is struggling because many of her former patients won't come back to see her after how she treated her son. Brian has been through many divorces now. We always make sure each new wife knows what kind of man he is with. And you, Kelly? How are you doing? I felt guilty for 5 years, Kathy. Every day I wish I could go back and tell him to watch out for what was happening. But I was too focused on myself. We were close when we were kids. I knew how he felt, but I thought he would never judge me. When he looked at me with disappointment and called me a worthless person, I didn't hate him for it. I should have, but after what he just learned, I couldn't blame him. I looked in the mirror and hated what I saw. Slowly, I started to drift away from my family. When did you last see them? I haven't seen my parents in 2 years. I haven't seen Brian in even longer. Dad's parents actually agreed with what they did. I haven't seen them since that night. Mom's parents? That's another story. At least while they were alive. They're gone? They watched from afar as our family fell apart. I doubt Mark knows that they both passed away within a year of each other 3 years ago now. Grandma always wished she could see him one last time but understood why he left. All they wanted to know was that he was happy. He's happy, Kelly. I make sure of that, as do his kids, whether born or not. You're having a baby, she whispered. 6 months along. We have a 2-year-old son, and we're expecting a daughter. She started to cry again. I couldn't blame her. She had missed out on so much of his life. Kelly, I said softly, this is going to take time. I'm not sure if Mark will want to talk on the phone. He's already said if he ever agrees, it will be face-to-face. Where are you living? He doesn't want that shared, but definitely not in Sydney. He hasn't been back since the day he left. I occasionally get messages from old friends asking if I've heard from him. I always say no. Keep saying that. He wants nothing to do with them. I heard his closest friends knew. Let's just say the guys he played rugby with were upset about what happened to him. They just want to know he's safe and sound. Let them know that he's happy. Only those who are not involved or unaware, though. I have a list of names he would rather avoid. Kathy, I'll do anything to see my brother again. I don't care what I need to do or prove. I just want to hug him and tell him how sorry I am. I know after 5 years it might not mean much. It would mean the world, Kelly. Over the next 2 months, Kelly and I talked a couple of times a week. She was curious about what Mark was doing, so after checking with him that I could share more, I told her we lived on a farm. That made her happy. Mark always loved working outside and using his hands. My parents thought that type of work was not good enough for us and our family name. I quickly messaged her when I was in the hospital, getting ready to have our baby. Kelly was really excited to meet Mark. She had a good idea of where he was, but hadn't asked any more questions after our first talk. She was being gentle about it. Mark hadn't talked to her himself, but he did send messages. He knew it was a bit awkward for me, and he apologized every time. I understood what he was dealing with. I need to trust her, Kathy, he said quietly one night, holding me close before I went to the hospital to have our second child. I'm working on it, I really am, but she was involved, and I just can't be sure. I told him it was all right. I enjoyed chatting with his sister. After I had our daughter, whom we named Michelle Catherine Smith, I stayed in the hospital for just a couple of days. Both of my pregnancies had been smooth. I noticed how sweet Mark was with our daughter, promising he would always be there for her. Watching him look down at her made me feel a mix of happiness and sadness, knowing he still had pain inside. All he needed was for Kelly to come home, and everything would be all right. 3 months after I got back home, I asked Mark to join me at the kitchen table. I must have used a special tone because he sat down a bit shyly. It was so cute that I laughed a little, and he smiled back at me, his blue eyes shining. I held his hand and looked into his eyes. "Invite your sister to come visit," I said. "Okay," he answered right away. I must have looked surprised, and he chuckled. "I think it's time, sweetheart. We can drive to Brisbane and meet her at the airport when she flies from Sydney. We can make a weekend of it." "Are you sure?" He squeezed my hand tightly. "Yes, it's time." Mark I still hadn't talked to Kelly for a long time. I felt bad about it, but I heard the chats between Kathy and my sister, and they seemed to get along well. I could tell a friendship was forming, and sometimes Kathy put the call on speaker so I could hear Kelly's voice. I knew what was going on back in Sydney and everything that happened after I left. Kathy and Kelly planned everything together. I thought driving would be difficult, so we decided to fly from Longreach to Brisbane. This way we wouldn't have to drive, and we'd get to Brisbane before Kelly arrived. Eli and Bill asked if we would be bringing her back. I said we would meet first in Brisbane, see how things went, and then I might tell her where I was living. Once we set a date, I booked our flights. I knew taking a baby on a plane could stir up feelings, but I thought the flight from Longreach would not be very crowded. Kathy and Kelly kept chatting until the Friday before we met. I listened in as usual when Kelly said goodbye. I love you, Mark. I cleared my throat. I'll see you tomorrow, Kelly. I could hear her feelings in her voice. Kathy took my hand. I look forward to meeting you tomorrow, she said. Me too, my sister whispered. I need to go. That night, I felt nervous. After the kids were asleep, Kathy sat with me and helped me feel calm by talking until I settled down. I held my daughter while taking my son's hand as we boarded the plane. Kathy knew I didn't like being away from her while I was at work. Every time I came home, I'd kiss my wife, hug my son, and then cuddle my daughter. I felt lucky to work on the farm, so I could usually be home every day. Sometimes I had to go out for a couple of nights, but it was rare. Bill had one of the other workers do that more often now. We landed in Brisbane in the late morning. I had never been there before, so it felt exciting. Kathy had visited a few times, so she would guide us when Kelly arrived. My son, Matthew, was very well behaved on the flight. Michelle slept the whole time, held close against me. I noticed Kathy watching me the entire time, our baby on my chest and our son sleeping peacefully next to me. You want more kids? She asked. If you do, then yes, I do too, I said with a smile. But what about the farm? Mark, you can run it with Dad. I love taking care of you and our kids. Once they're all grown, I'll get back into it. Or we can think about something else. What would Mom and Dad say? It will come to us, soon enough. You know Dad has mentioned that, right? I nodded. Her brother Chris didn't want the farm and knew about it. He was okay with that. Dad is getting close to retiring. Farming is hard. He wouldn't blame us if we sold it and moved somewhere more comfortable. Are you sure? I'm just thinking, Mark. You're not the only one who thinks deeply here. I chuckled and leaned in to kiss her gently on the forehead. I love you to the moon and back, I whispered. Only the moon, she joked. How about the sun? Better. We waited at the arrival area for Kelly's flight. Once it landed, we moved to where she would come out. Kathy took Michelle from me, holding Matthew's hand as we waited. The screen showed that the bags from the flight were being unloaded. That's when my nerves kicked in, feeling Kathy's hand in mine. It's okay, she whispered. I don't know what to do, I said quietly. My advice? I nodded. Give your sister a hug, then talk. I chuckled softly. My wife always gave me good advice, and I usually took it. A few people came through the sliding doors, and then Kelly showed up. She looked around before slowly walking toward us. She looked nice, a bit paler than I remembered. Her blonde hair was still bright, and her blue eyes looked just like mine. She was still short and slim. She moved toward us slowly, and I could see her bottom lip start to tremble. I felt Kathy's hand on my back, encouraging me to go to her. Kelly stopped right in front of me, looking up. I could tell she was nervous. She seemed like she might shake. When I lifted my hand, she flinched, which made me feel bad, but I gently placed my hand on the back of her neck. My other hand went to her back as I pulled her close. When she started to cry, it got very quiet around us. My shirt quickly became wet with her tears as I leaned down to kiss the top of her head. I knew there was no point in talking right away. She was too busy crying. I felt hot tears on my own cheeks, too. I should have realized, of everyone, my sister wouldn't have wanted what happened. She wasn't exactly a victim like I was, but I knew her family well. After a while, she leaned back and I used my thumbs to wipe her cheeks. Then I kissed her forehead, which made her cry even more. I hugged her tightly again. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I shushed her for now. I already knew how sorry she felt. We would talk later about everything. For now, I kissed the top of her head again and held her close. In that moment, I realized that I had missed her too. Once she calmed down, I leaned back and she looked up at me, a small smile on her face. You look good, Mark. You have a nice tan. Are you okay? No, I'm not okay. But right now, yes. I wrapped my arm around her waist and turned to my wife. Kelly, this is Catherine, but she likes to be called Kathy, my wife. We've been married for over 3 years. And this is our little boy, Matthew. He's 2, and she's holding our daughter, Michelle. She's almost 4 months old. Kathy passed me Michelle before hugging my sister. Kelly started to cry again, and Kathy needed a moment too. They knew each other pretty well, even though they only talked on the phone before. Then my sister got down on one knee to say hello to my son. He looked up at me, not sure who this new woman was. I nodded and smiled, which made him hug her. Kelly cried again as she hugged him back. After introductions, Kelly turned to me, looking for reassurance. "You're staying in the same hotel as us? I set everything up but the flight. 2 nights. I already have the rental car in the parking lot. We'll check in, get settled, and then we can talk." She hugged me again tightly. As I stroked the back of her head, I whispered softly, "It's okay, Kelly. I've heard everything. We still need to talk." "I know," she said softly. "But I believe you didn't do anything wrong. Deep down, I know it wasn't you. You were the only person I really liked in that family." It took me a long time to calm down. I gently lifted her chin so she could look into my eyes. "I'm sorry for what I said. I really regret being so harsh. Your words made me see things differently, Mark. They were hard to hear, but I needed them. If you thought that way about me..." We got into the rental car, and once I had the GPS ready, I drove us to the hotel. It was nice enough, but I spent quite a bit of money to stay there. Kelly had her own room next to mine. My son was very good, even though he was just 2 years old. Kathy fed Michelle before I knocked on Kelly's door to see if she was ready to go out for dinner. As we pushed the stroller along, Kathy held onto my left arm. I looked over at Kelly to check in with her. She took my right arm and wiped her eyes again. I paused and gently touched her shoulder. "It's okay," I whispered. "You should be angry with me. All I want is to hear the truth from you, Kelly." We chose a cozy Italian restaurant for dinner. My son was awake and making noise. With just a look from me, he quieted down. I ruffled his hair and told him he was a good boy. This made him smile, and he went back to happily coloring on the paper he had. When dinner arrived, we each had non-alcoholic drinks. Kelly shared everything she remembered. Some of it I already knew. She described Tony, how he looked and acted. He was at least 20 years older than Sally and me, and I was sure her parents chose him. "He won Sally over," she said. "Gave her gifts to show how rich he was. Plus, my parents were constantly saying how they thought you weren't good enough for her. I couldn't believe it, Mark. They wanted to break you two apart." "Why?" was all I could ask. "You upset them by doing your own thing." That's how I see it anyway. They never truly explained it to me. I heard bits and pieces, but they didn't like that you turned down their so-called help. They hated that you wanted to be your own person and find your own way, unlike Brian, who still depended on the family for everything. "And you?" Kelly looked down, then met my eyes. "I'm alone, Mark. I don't talk to any of them from the family. Most of my friends left me once they found out what happened. It was a scandal, Mark. A big deal." I took a deep breath. "Do you know where my daughter is?" She almost broke down in tears, so I pulled her close for another hug. That told me all I needed to know. She didn't have an answer. If she did, she would have told me right away. "I've tried," she cried. "I've done everything I could to find out. But they haven't revealed anything in 5 years. Brian knows something, but I haven't spoken to him in years." Then she laughed. "They were aware you hired someone to keep an eye on them. He wasn't very good at it." "That's too bad," I said quietly. "The police asked us more than once about what happened. Mom and Dad said they had nothing to do with your daughter's disappearance. They admitted Sally was seeing someone else and that they knew she left the country with Tony and your daughter." She chuckled again. "He really can't stand you, Mark. I mean, he truly dislikes you." "I hardly care about him, Kelly. He's not my problem anymore. What about Cheryl? I think she feels a bit of regret. After all, she gave you life, but she's not foolish. She knows that chapter is closed." "And Brian?" "He doesn't like you at all. I'm not sure who dislikes you more, him or Dad." "And you?" I asked softly. "I missed my big brother. We always got along well, Mark, even after you moved out. I understood your reasons, although I thought you were making a mistake at the time. Your life could have been easier, but now that I'm older, I see why you had to do it. I respect your choice now." I heard her sigh. "I've felt nothing but guilt for 5 years. I should have told you what was happening. But Dad and Brian scared me, said they'd cut me off, take everything away. Dad tried to win me over with gifts. I've changed a lot in 5 years, Mark. I'm not the same person I was. I sighed and gently patted my sister's back. Do you have any idea where she might be? I asked. I can only guess. Tony's accent. I couldn't figure it out, but I don't think he's American. If they went anywhere, I bet they're in Europe. But I don't believe he was English. If he was, he had a pretty neutral accent. The thing is, I don't think Mom and Dad have ever been abroad to see Katie. They never seemed like the kind of grandparents who cared. They did this to hurt you. I don't think they ever cared about anyone but themselves. I had the private investigator I hired watch Sally's parents. He eventually asked them if they'd heard from her. They told him she disappeared without a word and that they had no idea we split up. From what I've learned, that sounds just like them. Do you trust them? She asked. They always liked me. Yeah, I believe them, especially after they found out I had hired someone. Once they did, they had plenty to say. Most of it wasn't useful, but I did smile when the investigator shared some messages. I eventually called them to say goodbye. They wished me well and hoped I'd find my daughter someday. When we returned to the hotel, Kathy and I put the kids to bed. She suggested I spend more time talking to my sister. With the children in the room, we talked quietly. She saw the look in my eyes and smiled. When we get home, we'll have lots of time together. Do I ever tell you how much I care about you? I'm sure you tell me every day, Mark. I think I should say it more often. Go talk to your sister. She could use her big brother. She hugged me tightly. Can I suggest something? Of course. Invite her to the farm. Okay. I think my quick answer surprised her as she pulled back. But her smile, I believe her completely, sweetheart. My sister wasn't dishonest. I have to see it from a different view, but it was more like keeping a secret than telling a lie. I will let myself trust her. If she breaks that trust, it's done between us. It's that clear. This earned me a soft kiss on my lips. I'm really excited about our time together when we get home. Before heading upstairs, I went to the hotel bar and bought a bottle of wine and a couple of beers. Then I knocked on Kelly's door. She wore a cozy dressing gown and looked relaxed. When she saw the wine, her face lit up as she opened the door for me. We sat together on her bed, leaning against each other while we enjoyed our drinks and caught up. I shared everything about what I had been through, which brought up a lot of tears. I told her everything. She wanted to know, and I felt I should share it. More than once, she needed my support. By the time I finished, it was past midnight, and we were both so tired. Getting off the bed, she slipped under the blankets while I sat on the edge. Tomorrow we'll just enjoy our time together. No more talk about the past, it's over. Nothing else to share. I don't want to go back, she said. I want to stay closer. Small steps, Kelly, but I'm happy to hear you'd like to be closer to me. I'm here for you. I leaned down and gave her a supportive gesture. She needed another long hug. The fact I felt guilty told me I at least felt something, I whispered as I held her. I tried to hide my feelings, but that never works. Your messages every week, Kelly, show how much I mean to you. I can open my heart to you, too. No wonder she married you. She fell in love with someone who needed care. She helped put my life back together. When we returned to the airport on Monday at lunchtime, it felt like we had moved past the hard times. Kelly was already talking about packing up and moving, but first, she had an invitation to visit the farm and meet my parents. When I called them Mom and Dad, she understood. 3 months later, Kelly was flying into Longreach Airport. Eli and Bill were eager to meet her after Kathy and I had told them about our first meeting in Brisbane. Soon, we started chatting online with video calls, and I felt sad that Kelly was by herself while the 4 of us got together to talk to her. But Eli and Bill thought she was amazing and were excited to meet her. The airport was small, so it took just 5 minutes for Kelly to get off the plane and come to the bag claim area. She dropped her things when she saw me, hugging me tightly just like before. This time, she laughed as I lifted her up easily. After picking up her bag, I joked, "You're here for a week, not a year." "I'm a woman, Mark. I prepare for everything," she replied with a smile. As she settled into the passenger seat of my truck, she quickly got to see what the countryside really looked like. I looked at her from time to see her reaction. The sky was so blue, and it stretched over the fields as far as we could see. The weather was warm, but nice, with the sun shining above. When we pulled into the driveway, Kelly gasped at the size of the house and laughed as I told her it would take hours to walk from there to the edge of our land. Kathy, Eli, and Bill came out to greet us after I honked the horn, and Kathy welcomed her warmly before we introduced everyone. Kelly felt like family within minutes. Bill even joked that he adopted another daughter. Kelly had a wonderful week on the farm. She worked a bit on her laptop, but joined Kathy, Bill, and me outside every day. She had some experience with horses, so one afternoon we took her out to ride and showed her all the sheep and cows we had. Kathy planned a dinner in Longreach for Friday night with some of our friends, and Eli and Bill gladly offered to look after the kids. They often offered to babysit to give Kathy and me a night off. Kathy must have set things up, because my sister started talking to a guy named Jim. I knew him well, and he was a great person. They hit it off within half an hour, and by the end of the night, my sister seemed to really like him. I shared a knowing look with Kathy while they chatted as we got ready to leave. "You planned this, didn't you?" I whispered. "She said she wants to move closer," she whispered back. "I thought I'd give her another reason." Jim leaned in even closer to talk to my sister, and the look on her face made it clear she would want to visit often. After saying goodbye to her on Sunday as she flew back to Sydney through Brisbane, I stopped by the RSL and ran into Jim. He looked a bit shy at first. "So, your sister Mark," he started. "What about her?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "She's single, right?" "She wouldn't have talked to you if she wasn't, Jim." I looked him in the eye. "Are you thinking about dating her?" He looked uneasy, making a nearby group laugh. "Well, yeah, she's great." "You think my sister is great, Jim?" He smiled nervously. "Yeah, Mark. I've never met anyone like her before." "Did she give you her number?" He hit his forehead and everyone laughed. I sighed. "Give me your phone. Seriously, have you never asked a girl out before?" He almost dropped the phone when he pulled it from his pocket. I typed her number in for him. "Jim, if you hurt her, I won't be happy." "Yeah, Mark, of course." He rushed outside, clearly excited to call her. We all giggled as I looked around the room. He came back in half an hour later, smiling like he had a secret. 8 years later, I checked my watch. "Kids, if you think I'm leaving without you just because you're taking your time, you've learned fast that I will carry you to the car if I have to." Michelle was the first to come down the stairs, looking charming like her mother. Ricky followed behind, 2 years younger and carrying a backpack that was too big for him. Matthew was last, moving slowly as always. Even at 10, he loved to stir up trouble. I got it. He wanted to stay at the farm watching Dad work, dreaming of becoming a cowboy. Kathy came in with our 3-year-old Samantha. Our youngest was still at home, but she would go to preschool soon. We decided not to have more kids. After our 4th, I had a procedure done. My wife joked that I was very fertile, so she made sure I got tested every 6 months. "You just look at me sometimes, and I wonder if I'm going to be pregnant again," she laughed more than once. Once everyone was buckled in, I drove them to the same primary school, even though they were in different grades. Kelly was there to greet me as always with her 2 kids. She had moved to Longreach 6 months after meeting Jim and married him soon after. It was a fast romance, but she was in love. Jim was as committed to her as I was to my wife. Kelly loved living in the outback and was happy she could do most of her work online. Once a month she flew to Brisbane for meetings, but she preferred to stay close to family, our family. As for those back in Sydney, she had cut ties completely. I tried one last time to find my daughter. I felt like I had tried everything to locate her. The police? Nothing. Private investigators? Nothing. Online searches? Nothing. The courts couldn't help either. But I never lost hope. I continued to look online, sharing her picture everywhere I could. Sometimes I got messages, but they never led anywhere. John and Cheryl wouldn't give me any information, which didn't surprise me. They seemed to have figured out why she was asking and told her to leave, never to come back. I was glad to hear she stood up to them, clearly sharing her feelings. Eli and Bill were now Ma and Pa to Kelly, while she called Jim's parents Mom and Dad. They loved Kelly just as much. When I got back to the farm to start working, I went inside and saw Kathy on the phone. She looked happy to see me and quickly hung up, her cheeks turning pink. "What's happening?" I asked. "It's a secret," she replied with a grin. "A secret, huh? The kind I can find out with a tickle? Don't you dare!" I walked closer and she playfully ran outside. Bill was watching us and laughed. She didn't run far. Soon she came back with a look that told me to keep my hands to myself. Just a tiny bit, I teased her. So I gave her a quick hug. Trust me, she whispered. Always. Is it a good secret? Definitely. I thought about it. Well, my birthday is coming up. Is it about that? Maybe. I'll take that as a yes. I don't ask for much, just some time with family and friends. Maybe some good food and drinks. I think I can make that happen. Kathy took care of the kids while I worked with her dad. He had been talking about retiring soon, but I'd heard that for the past 5 years. I knew he didn't want to tire himself out, but leaving work would be hard for him. What caught my interest was how he wasn't pushing Kathy and me to take over. He hinted a few times about selling the whole farm to help us live comfortably somewhere else. I've always dreamed of retiring by the sea, he said. I've only seen it once. At least he and Eli had their small cottage, and they kindly let Kathy and me have the farm to raise our family. Bill and I had talked about plans for the cottage because I wanted to make sure they didn't have a tiny space. Eli often reminded me that they just needed a little place for some privacy, and she was right. They spent most of their time in the big house anyway. Sitting on the porch with drinks in hand, Bill asked, "If I sold everything and gave you and Kathy a lot of money, what would you do?" I glanced at my drink label before looking off into the distance. Honestly, Dad, I really don't know. It would depend on what Kathy wants. Did you talk to her about this? I have. She plans to stay home until Samantha starts school, then look for a part-time job. She wants to take the kids to school, pick them up, and find something she can do from home. She thought you might like to go back to what you did before. She's hinted at it, but I didn't realize how serious she was. Maybe I let something slip. It's okay, Dad. I'm not sure Kelly would be happy if she moved here just for us to leave later. It would depend on Jim, too. He's smarter than he knows. There's always manual work if needed. He took a sip of his drink. Just an old man's thoughts, son. Don't worry about it too much. Have you received any offers? Nope. I won't know until I actually put the land up for sale. Once I do, offers will come in quickly, and if they really want it, they'll pay a lot for each piece of land. The biggest cattle ranch in Australia, down in South Australia, was valued at around $16 million a few years ago. If we find the right buyer, we could sell this place for a few million. That night, Kathy snuggled close to me after we had put the kids to bed. I told her about my talk with him. It was not the first time he had thought about selling. "He's getting tired," she whispered. "I think he doesn't want to put all the pressure on us." I gently touched her stomach, noticing how quickly she had gotten back to her usual shape after having Samantha. "What do you think?" "I love living here, but part of me thinks our kids would have an easier life. Not in a big city, but a town by the sea would be nice. Like Dad said, somewhere near the ocean. The kids would really like that." She turned and cuddled up to me. "These are just ideas, Mark. Dad won't sell anytime soon. He's just being careful and wants to take care of his family." I decided not to worry about it right now. "So, what's this secret?" I asked. "You'll find out soon," she said with a gentle smile. "I love you. I love you too." We shared a sweet moment before falling asleep. Even after having 4 kids, we rarely went 2 days without being close. But it was not only about being together physically. The little acts of kindness meant the most. We'd been married for over 10 years, and our bond was strong. Just by looking at Eli and Bill, we could see how easy it could be if we kept working at it. Still, I wondered what she planned for my birthday. It wasn't a big milestone, but I knew my 40th would be important, and that was still a few years away. When I felt my wife drift off, I kissed her forehead. I saw a smile appear on her face, even in her sleep. Then I pushed my thoughts aside. Luckily, my birthday was on a Sunday, and I woke up early. Being the birthday boy, I was treated to a big English breakfast, with Eli and Kathy making everything. The kids enjoyed toast and juice before heading off to watch cartoons, while the adults enjoyed a moment of peace over breakfast. Samantha ended up sitting on my lap as I ate, occasionally asking for a tiny spoonful of baked beans. Joining the kids in the living room, Eli and Bill came in with a couple of gifts for me, and Kathy had some too. I hadn't asked for anything, but I always appreciated their thoughtfulness. Kathy sat beside me, while my 2 daughters were close by, just wanting to be near their dad on his special day. "Kelly is on her way. Kathy said after her phone buzzed. "Are you looking forward to a big steak?" Bill asked with a grin. The adults laughed. He was about to say something else when he cleared his throat. Better be careful with my words. "Yeah, we have a few fun things planned for later." Kathy finally moved, giving me a kiss on the cheek before heading to find her daughters. Michelle was reading a book, and Samantha was watching cartoons while leaning against me. I felt content. Eli and Bill glanced my way from time to time, looking just as happy as I was. "Mark, Kelly is here," Kathy called from the door. I stood up while the kids stayed seated, and I walked to the front door. Kathy stood there, and after kissing me, she opened the door. As the doors of the truck opened, Kelly got out, and the two kids rushed to her. Another young woman also stepped out from the passenger seat. As I watched her run toward me, I felt overwhelmed and dropped to my knees. My eyes blurred with tears of joy. I heard her shout before she hugged me tightly, filling me with happiness. "I love you so much, Daddy," she said gently. Katie. When I was 5 years old, a woman named Sally Samuels took me away from my father. At that moment, I didn't fully understand what was happening. The last time I spoke to Daddy on the phone, he told me he would see me on Friday. I knew the days of the week. It was Wednesday evening when I talked to him. He said he missed me, loved me, and that we'd have fun at the park on the weekend. That never happened. Sally wasn't honest. I didn't grasp it back then. We left our home on Thursday night and stayed at a hotel near the airport. When I asked what was happening, Sally told me we were going to surprise Daddy by flying to see him. I was so excited to see him first. I had no idea that Sally would keep me sleepy for the next 3 days, and I ended up sleeping most of the time. Later, I learned we had flown from Sydney to London via Hong Kong. I woke up in London and instantly felt something was off. Even a 5-year-old can tell when something isn't right. Sally was beside me, and I recognized the man with her, although I didn't know his name. "Where's Daddy?" I asked while we stood in line. Sally just told me to be quiet. I kept asking, feeling more uneasy. When I began to cry, she tried to hand me off to the unfamiliar man. That made me uncomfortable, and I let her know. I ended up in the back of a taxi with them. I noticed how close Sally was to him, which confused me. "Where's Daddy?" I asked again. "I'll explain when we get home," Sally said. Home? This didn't feel like home. This was a strange place I didn't know. Home was the apartment where Daddy lived. The taxi stopped, and Sally pulled me out, nearly dragging me along. Nothing looked familiar, and it was chilly. "Where are we?" I asked. "We live here now. This is our new home. What about Daddy?" She bent down to look me in the eye and said, "He doesn't love you. Mummy loves you. And Tony will be your new daddy, and love you too." I couldn't believe her. Even though I was only 5, I could sense something about him. I didn't like Tony just from looking at him. Something felt wrong. And Sally was not telling the truth. "Daddy loves me," I whispered. Sally held my shoulders tightly. "We live here now. We are your family. You will learn to care for Tony as your new daddy. Your old daddy was not what you need. He never gave us what we wanted. You'll see soon enough. Now, do you want to see your new home?" "No, I want to see Daddy." Sally sighed and took me upstairs in the house. I didn't like my new room. It felt cold. My things were the same, but it didn't have the warmth of our old home. Sally wanted me to call Tony Daddy. I refused right away. "You'll never be my daddy," I said firmly within a week. Sally punished me for that. It wasn't the first time, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. I started a new school, but I didn't like many of my classmates, and the teachers were strict. They wanted me to be called Belinda, not Katie. "No, my name is Catherine Samuels," I said loudly. "Daddy calls me Katie." The teacher looked puzzled. "I'm sorry, that's not what I have on my list. You're here as Belinda Thompson." That night, Sally explained that she had changed my name for my safety. I didn't understand what she meant, but later I overheard her talking to the teacher and the principal. They said my name was now Belinda, and I was not Katie anymore. If I had known how to say it better, I would have shouted, "No, my name is Katie!" I stomped my foot in anger. "She'll learn soon," Sally said. I didn't like the way she spoke. I understood why when we got home. Sally and Tony could call me whatever they wanted, but I was Katie, and I wrote that name down everywhere to remember it. After 6 months, Sally gave up on making me call Tony any kind of father. He was just you, him, or Tony. I was sometimes sent to bed without dinner for being disrespectful, but I didn't mind. I later found out that they were trying to control me. Sally told me many times a day that Daddy didn't love me, that he forgot me, and that he moved on and didn't care. She lied. Every day she lied. I refused to call her anything else. Every time she said things like that, I would reply, "Daddy loves me." Sally didn't like that I didn't believe her. Things changed when she became pregnant when I was 8. After their son was born, I felt both included and like a reminder of my old daddy. When a daughter came 2 years later, I was just the oldest child in the house. They made sure I had food, clothes, and went to school, but Tony pulled away all his kindness. By the time I was 10, I felt happy he stayed away. Sally had stopped trying to control me. I asked about my daddy at least 3 times a week. I made sure to do it in front of Tony, who never raised his voice at me. I heard them argue a few times, especially just before my 11th birthday. "Just send her back to Australia then," Tony shouted. "She's my daughter." "I won't send her back to him," my mother replied. "Sort this out. I'm frustrated. She's 10 years old and doesn't even respect me." "My daughter is not the problem, Tony. Don't speak to her like that." There was a pause. "Maybe we should think about a different school, honey," she said softly. "Will that make you happy?" "I'm not wasting money on her education. Fix this. I'm tired of it." I smiled to myself from the top of the stairs. I was getting to him. On my 13th birthday, I happily skipped downstairs for breakfast. "Tony," I said quietly. He grunted something back. "Morning, Sally," I said cheerfully. "What did you just call me?" I pointed. "That's Tony." I pointed again. "And you are Sally." "I am your mother. You will call me that," I scoffed. "Yeah, and what a great mother you are. So the usual question. Where's my father, Sally?" She hit me. It hurt and my eyes watered. I staggered a bit from the blow. Even Tony looked surprised, the noise of his newspaper fading away. "You little brat," Sally whispered. "All we've done is try to give you a better life." I rubbed my cheek with my hand. "Where's my daddy?" I asked quietly. "You think I haven't figured it out, Sally? I know what you did. You took me away from him." "That's it. No birthday anything for you. You don't deserve it," I replied firmly. "You can't stop me from finding him." I saw Tony stand up and step forward. I turned to him, my face serious. "Put a hand on me, Tony, and I'll tell someone what you've done." I started to cry, pretending to be more upset than I was. I knew this would shock them. Tony's face went pale and he stepped back. He knew I was serious. I hadn't let him touch me in years, but this was to prove a point. "You ungrateful little brat," Sally hissed. I turned back. "Just like my mother, it seems. This is how it will be, Sally. I won't go to boarding school. I heard your conversation. Did you think I wouldn't hear you?" Her face went even whiter. "If you send me there, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man your husband is. I'll stay here until I finish school, and then I will find my father. I promise you that." "I should have left you there," Sally whispered, looking defeated for the first time I could remember. "Yes, you should have. I won't forget and I won't forgive you." I turned back to Tony, who was trying to step away from me. "If you do anything to stop me from going back home, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." I could tell he was overwhelmed. When I was 13, I felt like I had Sally and Tony cornered. What Sally didn't know was that I learned how to stand up for myself from my mother, who did that one thing right. I kept a diary from the time I could write well. Later, I had a computer and started an online diary where I wrote letters to my dad almost every day. As I got older, I noticed how often Sally and Tony would leave me out when they went out with my siblings. I didn't mind too much. They took care of me, fed me, clothed me, and Tony even gave me pocket money, which I saved in a bank account. I didn't have many friends, just a few I trusted with my secrets. Those closest to me called me Katie instead of Belinda. 3 friends knew the whole story, and soon I was spending 1 or 2 nights a week with them. I wasn't sure if Sally noticed I was gone. By 14, I had a job at a fast food place and made sure to keep my grades up, which was one thing Sally couldn't complain about. She still went to her meetings, and that was one of the few times she said something nice to me. By then, Tony hardly spoke to me, and I ignored him right back. We were fine that way, My siblings seemed innocent. I barely knew them since Tony kept me away from them. Once I was older, I was hardly home. I had no idea if Sally was trying to control them. I figured Tony was just waiting until I turned 18 to send me away. I had social media but promised myself not to look for my dad until I was older. At 15, I started my search, but I didn't know his first name. To me, he had always been Daddy. I realized I needed my real documents. My mom kept everything in a box, so one day when they were out, I gathered what I needed, including my passport. Luckily, it still had enough time left for me to return to Australia at 18. My dad's name was Mark Samuels. I figured out quickly that some forms that had his signature were not really signed by him. There were many Mark Samuels on social media. Facebook seemed like the best place to look. After weeks of searching, I still hadn't found him. He must have privacy settings on, I whispered to myself. I asked Sally about why she took me away from him, but she said it was none of my business. I could have pushed for more answers, but I thought it was better to keep things calm. We had fought enough over the years. She knew I didn't like her much. A couple of months before I turned 16, I finally figured out a way to search for him. Instead of looking directly for him, I would look for family. I struggled to think of who they could be. I didn't even know my dad's parents' names. I remembered Uncle Brian, but when I tried to look for him, I stopped quickly. There was always something about him that I didn't trust. My father didn't like him. Auntie Kelly, I whispered to myself. She had always been nice to me, and he got along with her. I found her the next day. That's when I noticed how much had changed. He had changed his name to Mark Smith. On Kelly's profile, it said she had only one brother. My hand shook as I moved the mouse to click on his name. Tears filled my eyes when his profile opened. The picture showed my father and me, both smiling at the camera. I couldn't remember the exact day, but he used to take me to the park every weekend. I could see trees behind us. Other parents looked at him with respect, and I remembered him blushing at their kind words. Next, I looked at his profile. Father to 5 children, Katie. I couldn't take in the rest, but I looked at the pictures. He now had a family with 4 other kids. It seemed like he lived in the countryside on a farm. Kelly appeared to be there too. There was no sign of the family I once knew. Maybe they didn't talk anymore. What made me cry was reading the messages. Each birthday brought words from him, full of love for me. I needed to know more, so I clicked on the photo of his wife, Kathy Smith. She also shared feelings of missing me, saying she loved me through stories. My father had married a lovely woman. They looked joyful, devoted to each other. The way they looked at one another reminded me of the warmth I once shared with my father. I'd had a plan since I was 13. Now, it was time to change it. Sally and Tony had hurt me by taking my father away, and I wanted to confront them about it. I desperately wanted to reach out to him, but I didn't want to do it online. After all this time, it felt wrong. I promised myself I would open up to him once I found him, and I knew his wife and sister would help me. The next morning, I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror and pretended to feel sad. I slowly walked downstairs, and Sally and Tony looked up from the table, surprised. "Can I join you for breakfast, please?" I whispered. I rarely ate breakfast with them. Sally stood up, grabbed a plate, and served some bacon and eggs. She watched as I shuffled over to sit down. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered. "What was that?" she asked softly. Even Tony looked surprised. "Thank you, Mom." I noticed Tony's surprise again, but the younger kids stayed quiet. I ate quietly, trying to look as sad as possible. When I finished, I waited for them to be done before getting up. I took my plate to the sink and washed it while Sally watched me closely. When I went to hug her, she hesitated for a moment. But as soon as I squeezed her, I felt her arms wrap around me. "I'll see you after school, Mom." When I got home from work, Sally was sitting all alone in the living room. I sat next to her on the couch, and she looked at me with curiosity again. Before she could ask, I pretended to cry. I let the tears flow as she held me tightly, rocking me gently. I had practiced this well. She didn't ask what was wrong, but I could tell she was smiling to herself, maybe realizing I was looking for my father online. I was sure she was putting things together. "I'm so sorry," I cried. "I love you, Mom." She lifted my chin and looked into my eyes warmly. I had practiced this look in the mirror at school, broken, sad, desperate for her love. She hugged me close, whispering that she had always loved me no matter what. It would take time to heal, but I was her daughter, and she would always love me. I had dinner with them that night. I wasn't sure if they knew what I had been doing, so I told them I worked after school and on weekends. I said I planned to go home, but I wanted to show respect to Tony since he raised me since I was 5. I thanked him for everything and said I was sorry for my past actions. It took time for them to believe me, but within a month, I had Sally convinced. As my birthday approached, we started going out together when I had time off. I was invited to family events and met Tony's parents, showing them the real me. I didn't get too close to my siblings, though. I didn't want to hurt them as part of my plan, but I acted like a good sister, helping with homework and playing games. I knew Mom was convinced, but Tony still had doubts. A couple of months after my 16th birthday, I overheard him say, "I'm just not sure about this new Belinda. For over 10 years, I didn't hear from her. I know she didn't like me during that time." Then he added, "Now she's suddenly a good young woman." I heard my mother chuckle. "Sweetheart, don't you see? She started looking for her father. He blocked me years ago, so I don't know what he's doing now, but he's probably not in her life anymore. She's realized she might be alone in the world now if her father is gone, or maybe he's moved on and found another family. I honestly don't care. I have my daughter back. I can forgive her for everything because I see the love in her eyes for me again." "Are you sure she's not tricking us? I mean, I remember what she said. I've never forgotten that." "Sweetheart, I know the past still hurts, but there was no missing the sadness in those early weeks. She knows she hurt us. She has said sorry to me more than once for everything she did. And you've hurt her too. She won't call you Dad. Step-parents aren't usually called that anyway. But you have to admit she treats you like her father in every other way." He was quiet for a few seconds. "I wish she had acted like that from the start," he said, sounding truly sad. "We kept her from her father. I didn't realize how strong the connection was, and I regret that, dear. But let's not forget, when we were at his parents' house, he was treating her nicely, spending time with her while I was not around. And remember those visits you had to our old apartment when we spent time together there? I could tell he was curious about us, but I never gave him a reason to ask too many questions. I made sure he stayed focused on his daughter. I could easily tell him anything right to his face. Hearing all this made me feel angry, but I held it back. I began to understand that Sally was involved with someone else, just not to such a hurtful level. "I still can't believe his own parents set us up," he said, sounding proud of himself. I couldn't stand him, acting like he was my father. It made me feel sick. "And his brother was my best man at our wedding while his parents came to give you away. I barely remembered the wedding. I didn't enjoy it at all. I know they never liked me or the fact that I had a child, but since you were their friend, it seemed like a win for everyone. You get a new life, I get a great new life, and they took what mattered to him most." I almost let out a gasp of pain. How could they be so unkind? I couldn't take it anymore. I quietly went back to my room. I spent the rest of the night crying in bed, but this also made me more determined. I decided to show more love and warmth. I showered hugs on Sally. I started calling Tony Dad. I kissed his cheek. We would cuddle. It all stayed innocent, just daddy and daughter time. I played my part so well. By the time I turned 17, they believed my act completely. The love he had pulled away was now fully aimed at me. Sally admired her lovely oldest daughter, who was becoming a polite young woman. Behind my closed bedroom door, I laughed often. Sally thought she was clever, but I was outsmarting her at each turn. Tony loved to show me off, buying me fancy dresses and taking me to garden parties. It was all a show. I was just as fake as they were. Sally glowed with pride. Tony always told me how proud he was. As I grew older, I realized that I wasn't interested in boys. I never shared my personal life with them. Most of the time, they respected that. Sally would sometimes ask about boys, but I told her I wasn't interested. I wanted to focus on my studies and working. I thought Tony would tell me to stop, but he liked that I was responsible and supported me. He had so much money that he would take my weekly paycheck and put the same amount into my bank account. I thanked him every time. It was while I was working as a waitress at a popular restaurant chain that I met Jennifer. With my blonde hair and blue eyes, I took care of my tanned skin. Sally even paid for me to get my hair done at a salon every month. Jennifer was a young woman with dark hair and hazel eyes. By our second date, I felt a special bond with her. After our first time together, I knew she was someone I wanted in my life. After 2 months of dating, I shared everything about myself with her. She was surprised, but not shocked. Coming from a well-off family, she understood people's behavior. "My parents can be tough," she said. "Luckily, I'm an only child, so they focus on me. I could push back, but that would just make things harder for me." She called me Katie. We both had feelings for each other, but I wanted to take my time. She agreed to wait for me. What made me fall completely in love with her was what she said 3 months before my 18th birthday, after I finally told her everything. "I want to be with you." We planned everything over the months. I would turn 18 before my father turned 38, giving me 4 months to get ready. As the well-behaved daughter, Tony and Sally threw me a big birthday party. Friends and family were invited, but thankfully no one from Australia came. All of Tony's family was there. Tony looked at me with pride. I wasn't sure if he thought about the past. Sally was extra loving towards me, saying her first daughter was now a young adult. That night, Jennifer was there and saw everything for the first time. I needed a break, so we went to the bathroom together. While I washed my hands, I thanked her for being with me. "You're really good at pretending, Katie," she whispered. "I'm a bit worried. When I say I love you, I truly mean it, Jen. I know, they have no idea it's funny." When I got home that night, Tony and Sally hugged me tightly, telling me how much they loved me. As they went to bed, I kept smiling until the door shut. Once I was in my room, my smile faded as I got to work. I had things to prepare. The first thing I needed was a passport. That was easy to get from the Australian High Commission. Living in London made it simple. I could just take the Underground. I had all the forms filled out, and I arranged to have the passport sent to my workplace instead of home. Jennifer and I secretly got married within a week, and we began working on getting her a spousal visa. While we waited for that, I started moving some of my things from my bedroom, just a small backpack at a time. With each day, more of my items ended up at her cozy apartment nearby. She had moved out during our last year of school, soon after her mother asked her to leave, but her father helped her by paying the bills and giving her an allowance. Then came the final piece. I was at Jennifer's place one evening when I logged onto Facebook for the first time in months. I had been using the name Belinda Thompson online for a long time. Now I created a new profile as Catherine Samuels, added a recent photo, and reached out to Kelly. She accepted my friend request right away and opened a chat. Instead of typing, I called her through the chat app and turned on the speaker so we could talk. "Hello, Kelly. It's Katie." "Oh my gosh," she whispered. "Is this really you?" "It's Catherine Samuels. My dad used to call me Katie. We lived in Wentworthville. I can't remember our exact address, but I remember our apartment. It was always sunny. We lived on the ground floor. My room was across from my parents'. The walls were light blue. My mom's name is Sally Samuels, but she goes by Sally Thompson now. Kelly, they took me away from my dad." Jennifer held my hand, giving it a squeeze. I wiped my tears. "Kelly, I want to go home. I want to see my dad. I need to tell him." "No, not yet." "Katie, why? He really wants to hear from you." "It's a long story, and I promise I will explain. But you have to trust me. I've been thinking about this since I was 13. Kelly gasped. "I've wanted to reach out every day, but I had my reasons. Sally took me from my family and my home. I won't leave until I'm sure I can get my life back. Please let me handle this my way." "Are you okay?" "Sally has controlled me for so long. Some might think she's made me just like her, but I haven't. I've done what I needed to do to fight back. I know that sounds bad." "You were hurt just like your dad. Is he okay, Kelly?" "He still loves you, Katie. He has never given up hope. But he never found out where you were. He tried the police, private detectives, and even searched online. He dealt with many dead ends, but he always hoped. For 13 years, he believed he would see you again, even if it took a long time." Hearing that made me cry, and Jennifer held me tightly. "What are you planning to do, Katie?" I told her my plan. Kelly asked when I wanted to go back. "His birthday is in 2 weeks," I said. "He's turning 38. I want it to be a surprise. Let me at least call his wife. She'll want to know. You can trust her to keep this secret." "If you're sure." They usually share everything with him, but this one will be worth it. I've already booked my flights. I'll send you the details. I can get to Brisbane, but from there, once I have the details, I'll arrange the flights to Longreach. That's easy. One more thing, Kelly. I'm married to a woman. Her name is Jennifer. I nudged Jennifer gently. Hiya, she said, sounding a bit shy. I was surprised to hear her like this. Kelly laughed. Okay, now that's a real English accent. G'day, Jennifer. I'm Kelly. It's nice to finally talk to someone back home. I can't wait to meet the family, especially her dad. I know everything, of course. Well, as long as his daughter is happy, he'll enjoy meeting his daughter's partner. The next week and a half felt slow. I kept pretending to be the caring daughter to both of them. I felt bad about leaving my siblings, but that was the parents' fault, not mine. The night before I planned to leave, I had a backpack ready at Jennifer's place. I had already sent a box with the things I wanted to keep. My room still looked normal. I didn't want anyone to know I was going away. I have the day off tomorrow, so I probably won't see you until dinner, I said. I could use a little rest. I've been busy nonstop. Of course, sweetie, Sally replied. Take a day for yourself. I can't remember the last time you had a break. Maybe you should treat yourself to something nice. I smiled at her. Sure, Mom. Maybe I'll get a pedicure or something. I'm always on my feet. The offer to work at my company still stands, Belinda, Tony said with a smile. But I know you want to find your own path, too. Maybe when I'm older. I'm thinking of taking a couple of college courses. That could help? Good idea. I can help you with that. If you get the certificates and work as hard as I know you can, you'll do well. Thank you, I said, feeling shy. I hardly slept that night. Sally and Tony hugged me goodnight before they went to bed. I hugged Sally for a long time, wanting to tell her my plans for the next day. But I let her go, told her I loved her, and watched her smile before she closed her door. I was only taking a small bag the next day. My alarm went off when I knew the house would be empty. After checking that no one was around, I took my last shower in the house, got dressed, grabbed my backpack, and double-checked everything. I left behind all the gifts I had received since I was 15. Walking downstairs, I put my keys on the kitchen table. I didn't leave a note. They didn't need to hear anything from me. I heard a car horn as I went out and closed the door behind me. Jennifer was waiting in a taxi. Our stuff is in the boot? I asked, getting in next to her. She smiled and nodded. Next stop, London Heathrow, then. I had an Australian passport and Jennifer had a British one. I had taken her last name, so I was Belinda Williams on my passport. The flight was through Singapore, and it was only as we began to land in Brisbane that my nerves kicked in. I felt more than just nerves. I started to cry, and Jennifer had to help calm me down. I was finally so close after such a long time. My phone lit up with messages from Sally as we passed through immigration, asking where I was. I could sense her worry because I had just vanished, and she might think the worst. Good, she could worry for a bit. I ignored the messages and focused on the border guard. They looked at my things first, then checked hers. The visa was fine, and after a couple of questions we stepped through, grabbed our bags, and Kelly was there to greet us. Tears filled our eyes as we hugged. I remember you being so small, she whispered. I had grown to 5'8", but still looked slim. Jennifer was 5'10", quite tall for a woman. She placed her hands on my shoulders, looking me over. Mark is... Does he know anything? Not at all. Kathy feels really bad about keeping this secret, but Mark will understand once we talk to him. Come on, our flight leaves in an hour. On the flight, I saw Kelly had a lot of questions, but she kept it simple and asked about the trip and how Jennifer and I met. When we landed in Longreach, Jennifer quickly felt how hot it was. I hadn't felt heat like that in years, and she soon found herself in the restroom, changing into shorts and a tank top. Kelly giggled, reminding her to put on plenty of sunblock because of her fair skin. We'll get her a nice tan soon, Kelly said as we got into her car. I'll help with that, I added. Kelly turned a bit red. Jennifer gave me a knowing look. She didn't take me back to her home, worried her 2 kids would find out. Instead, we stayed at a hotel since we had arrived a few days early to adjust to the time change. Get some rest, and we'll go to the farm on Sunday. Katie, you'll ride with me. Jennifer, you'll go with my husband. We'll go together so you won't miss too much. The night before I was set to see him, I couldn't sit still. My stomach was tied in knots, and I spent much of the time crying. I knew I needed something to calm my nerves, so my wife and I shared a moment together. Seeing that she was emotional too, I understood when our eyes met. "Your first time too?" I asked. She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks, and we shared another kiss. "I'm sorry if I misunderstood. I thought we were clear. We talked about it, but—" She gave me a comforting look. "I knew you wanted to wait until we were home. And Katie, you were definitely worth it. I love you so much." That night I curled up next to her, feeling her arms around me. I finally managed some sleep. We had a close moment during the night, but this time without tears. We were figuring out what felt nice together. "Nervous?" Katie asked as she picked me up on Sunday morning. "I've been waiting 13 years for this moment. So has your dad." She sighed. "He really did his best. Some might say he could have done more, but unless he got on a plane himself and visited every— Sally and Tony took me away from my family. I was taken from a parent." I showed her my phone, filled with unread messages. "She is worried about me now," I said, giving her a look that made her understand. It was a 30-minute drive to the farm where my dad lived. Longreach and the area around it was very different from London. The sky was big and mostly blue, with a few clouds here and there. It felt quite warm. Farmland stretched as far as I could see, mostly brown and yellow with a little green mixed in, and there were so many sheep everywhere. As we drove into the driveway, the house was quite big, with a smaller cottage beside it. Kelly called Kathy to let her know we had arrived. A woman came to the door, and I caught a glimpse of a lovely woman with brown hair. "Okay, kids, let's go see the family," she said. Everyone was excited to see their cousins. When we got out of the truck, a man walked through the door, smiling at his sister and the kids. Then he looked in my direction. He took a few steps forward, and I couldn't hold back my joy. "Daddy!" I shouted. I saw him fall to his knees as I ran toward him, sliding a bit in the dirt before crashing into his strong chest. His big arms wrapped around me right away, and I felt him crying as he held me tight. But I didn't mind. I closed my eyes and felt happiness for the first time in 13 years. I was home. "I love you so much, Daddy," I whispered. He didn't answer right away. I had never heard someone cry like that before. My own cheeks were wet, too. "I love you just as much, Munchkin," he said, and I giggled. That was my childhood nickname. Finally, he leaned back, wiping his eyes with my sleeve. I'm home, Daddy." I hugged him tightly again. "I'm home." That made him emotional again, and he squeezed me even tighter. I closed my eyes and enjoyed the warm feeling of being held by my father once more. He calmed down eventually, but I would have loved to stay like that for hours. He cleared his throat, gently stroked my cheek, and playfully covered my face with kisses, making me giggle. "I've missed so much," he whispered. "So much." "No, you haven't. I made sure you didn't." He stood up, helping me to my feet. He cleared his throat again and looked at his sister. "You found her?" Kelly pointed at Kathy. "You too?" Kathy looked emotional as my father hugged her warmly, thanking her over and over before turning to hug his sister. "She found us, Mark," Kelly said. "But we can explain everything later. I think you need to introduce some people." He took my hand and pulled me close to his side. "Katie, I'd like you to meet my wife, Kathy. We've been married for more than 10 years. These are our kids, your brothers and sisters, Matthew, Michelle, Richard, who likes to be called Ricky, and Samantha. Kids, this is your sister, Katie." Samantha was a sweet little girl. Ricky was a bit shy, but very kind. Michelle looked just like her mother, while Matthew resembled his father as a younger version of him. I held each of them close for a moment before Kathy hugged me longer than the rest. She finally spoke softly. "Welcome home, my long-lost daughter." He took my hand again and introduced me to 2 more people. "Katie, this is my mother, Eli, and my father, Bill." Seeing my surprised face, he shook his head. "It's a long story, but these folks have shown me more love since I got here than I ever knew before." They wrapped their arms around me. "Welcome home, dear," Eli said kindly. As Bill hugged me, I noticed Eli was comforting my dad, who was holding her close. I could see the care they had for each other. I understood right away why he called them Mom and Dad. My wife arrived while everyone was greeting me. She stood back and let the family hug me first. Then Dad noticed she was next to Jim and his niece and nephew. "Who's this?" he asked. She gestured to herself and walked over, taking my hand. I looked at my dad, and his smile was instant. "Dad, I want you to meet my wife, Jennifer. Jennifer, this is my father, Mark Smith. He has been waiting 13 years for this moment, just like I have." "My little girl is married," he said quietly, a little sad. My wife and I gave him a tight hug. "Only so she could be with me here, Daddy. We're going to celebrate here, with my true family." "What about yours, Jennifer?" he asked. She shrugged. "I don't think about them." Dad laughed loudly. "Sounds like we share that. I guess we have a lot to talk about." "We do, Daddy." At 5 years old, he was always Daddy to me. At 18, he was still my daddy. "What do you prefer?" "Whatever you want, Katie. The most important thing is that you're home again." "Then it'll be both, depending on what we're talking about. But I like Daddy more. I have 13 years to catch up on." "Me too, Munchkin. Me too." Jim and my father started to help with our things. There were plenty of rooms, but I heard him ask Michelle if she was okay sharing with her little sister. She was smart and understood, and Samantha was happy at the thought of sharing a room with her big sister. There was just one bed in the room, and my father asked me to wait. He left with Jim and came back half an hour later with a bigger bed and mattress, just about managing to carry it up the stairs. "My daughter is here with her wife," he said once everything was set up. "They are clearly going to stay together." Jennifer turned red, and I couldn't help but laugh. "My parents did the same thing when your father moved in with me," Kathy said with a smile. "And this is your home," Dad added, "for as long as you want." I hugged him tightly. "Is forever okay? What about your wife? Please, you've already made such an impact. I'd rather live with you than my family." "London? Oh, I never figured it out," he said quietly. "No one could ever find you." I leaned back and looked at his face. "They changed my name," I said sadly, handing him the passport from my pocket. He took it and looked at it, sighing. "Dad, she did something wrong. I've got all the papers. They faked your signature on a lot of it. I think it was your brother or father." I saw his anger flare for a moment. "I mean Brian and John, sorry." "It's not your fault, kiddo." He looked again. "Thompson, so that was his last name?" I nodded. "She married him?" I sighed. "Made me a flower girl and everything. I hated it. Your brother was his best man. Your parents came to give her away." Kathy gasped softly. Dad just sighed again, handing back the passport. "I'm honestly not surprised anymore by anything I learn about those people. There's a lot more, Dad. But it's your birthday, and I have a special gift for you." He smiled. "Apart from you being here right now, you'll get your turn. So will I. I've waited long enough." Mark-I couldn't stop holding her hand, embracing her, just looking at her and feeling my emotions rise. The smile never left her face as she stayed by my side. I told Kathy that I was thankful for her support that night. "Hope you're not the only one," my daughter whispered, glancing at her wife. I looked at my daughter, who was blushing while sipping her drink. "What?" she asked innocently. "I just need to remind you that you're not that little girl anymore." She instantly sat on my lap, resting her head on my chest. "I will always be your little girl, Daddy," she whispered. "I brought everything that shows how much I missed you the whole time. They'll mean a lot to me. I can imagine what's in them. You were always with me, Daddy. In my heart. Me too, sweetheart. Just thinking of this day kept me going." I kissed her cheek. "I'll never tell you how hard things were. Just know that you were my reason to keep going. Every day I woke up thinking, I want to see my daughter again." We had lunch around mid-afternoon, and the steak was as big as Bill promised. I barely touched a drop of alcohol, wanting to enjoy every moment. Jennifer was lovely, and it was clear why my daughter loved her. She was funny and clever, but also very kind. Her love for my daughter shone through. The fact that my daughter loved a woman, it didn't matter. My daughter was happy, her partner was great, and they were in love. That's all a parent wants. The conversation flowed easily for hours. Katie played with her siblings and cousins, clearly happy to be back with them. Matthew was thrilled to have an older sister and already looked up to her. All of my children were enchanted by her by the time evening came. Everyone was having a great time. When the sun went down, Mom and Dad sent the younger kids to bed. The rest of us gathered in the living room while Kelly and Jim stayed with Mom and Dad for the night. "Daddy," Katie said, snuggling up to me, "we need to talk about a lot of things, but there's one important thing I need to do tonight." "What is it?" "I need to reach out to someone important." "How?" I asked carefully. "I have my laptop in my backpack. Your TV looks like one of those smart TVs. I want to show her something. She only knows that I disappeared a few days ago. She's been trying to contact me ever since." Katie turned to me, and I saw her eyes filled with tears. "I'm going to need your support after this, Dad," she said softly, leaning against me. "Whatever you need, sweetheart. Whatever you need." They affected us both deeply. Kathy and her family helped me heal, and now your whole family, including your wife, will help you too. Katie waited for the right time, which was morning in the UK. She asked us to wait in the kitchen while she got everything ready. I didn't watch, but then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 13 years. I froze and felt my hands tighten into fists. Kathy put her hand on my shoulder. Only a few people could upset me like that. "Belinda, we've been so worried. Where are you, sweetie? We've been looking for you." "Hi," my daughter replied with determination. "Just a moment. I want you to meet some people." That was my signal. I walked into the living room and stood next to my daughter. She leaned against me, and I looked at the screen. The woman I barely recognized seemed to have aged. I remembered her as a lively young woman, and now she looked tired. Her eyes went wide with surprise. I stayed quiet. "Mark," she whispered. Kathy came in next and sat beside Katie, kissing her cheek. Jennifer followed, sitting on the floor between Katie's legs while my daughter played with her hair. Eli and Bill sat beside Kathy and me, and Kelly and Jim stood behind us. The woman on the screen looked shocked. "Meet my family," Katie said. "You let me down long ago, and now it's time for you to face what you've done." "No, Stop right there," Jennifer interrupted. "You need to listen. It's time for you to understand how your choices affected us. You've caused a lot of hurt." As Katie talked, I could see her confidence growing. "You did this to us. But now, I'm surrounded by love and support. I won't be defined by your actions." I could see that our family would be there for each other, no matter what the future held. "You broke our family. This will be the last time you hear from me, Sally, and I know more than you think. I have all the papers with me to prove that you and whoever helped you forged my father's signature. Taking me out of the country like that was wrong, and I could tell the police everything about how I've been hurt for over 13 years. Sally shook her head. No, we never. I heard enough over the years, Sally. You thought your talks were private. I looked at Katie. She seemed strong and ready. I heard all the things Tony said about me, and you know what? He was right. How does it feel now, Sally? You thought you loved your oldest daughter. Now you see it wasn't true. I've been angry since the day you took me away from my dad. I never wanted Tony around. You broke my dad's trust. I can't stand you. She took a deep breath. But you can't hurt me anymore, she said quietly. I'm back with my dad. I know how you tried to hurt him with Tony, Brian, John, and Cheryl. I know all your secrets. I'll tell Dad everything. It might hurt him, but he needs to know the truth. I can look back and see how I learned from the best. Sally had her head in her hands and was crying. How does it feel? I asked, feeling Kelly touch my shoulder gently. Sally looked up at me with tears in her eyes. All I ever wanted? No one here cares what you want, Katie cut in. I'm back with my family. My mom and dad, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle, and my wife. You're... what? I'm married, Sally. We tied the knot as soon as I turned 18. It was so she could come back with me. This is your home. It was never my home. It was just a place to stay. I waited until I was older. I learned, I planned, and then I did my part well. You all believed me. I could be an actress. It's left me with some scars, but Dad will help me now. He'll take care of his little girl, the one you took from him. All that money Tony gave me? Saved. I have a nice bit of money to use now. All the gifts, I left them behind. My love can't be bought. But I have the papers. I'll see a lawyer and ask if charges can be made. If they can, I'll go back to the UK to see you and Tony in court with whatever they come up with. She leaned closer. I might even bring up that threat from when I was 13. My word against his. You know I'm good at acting, Sally. Who do you think they'll believe? I felt a shiver thinking of her tone and the unspoken threat. I knew what she might say he did. I gently pulled her back. She looked at me and smiled, but her eyes showed pain. I kissed her forehead, hearing her sigh as she snuggled closer. You tried to break me, I finally said. I don't know what I did to you while we were together. I worked hard. I took care of you and our child. I was never harsh and never shouted. I loved my daughter and showed her kindness. I get that it might not have been enough for you, but what you did to me with my parents' help is unbelievable. It was not just mean, it was truly wrong. Katie is home now. She will stay with me for as long as she needs. You don't need to know where she is. You are no longer her mother or part of her life. She has everything she needs here. You made me miss 13 years of her life. 13 important years. I missed watching my little girl grow into the wonderful young woman she is now. I should feel angry at you. I should be filled with rage. But you know what? I feel sorry for you. You seem lost. And in a way, I've won. There are no clear winners or losers here, but I can sit with my daughter by my side and smile. I've won. I've gotten my daughter back. I have a wife I love and who loves me back. Light and love of my life, my wife whispered. I could see how Sally reacted. She heard the love in those 6 words. My wonderful wife, who has given me 4 children. I have family that I care for. Not John and Cheryl, they're gone to me. I mean Eli and Bill. Eli has hugged me more than Cheryl ever did. Bill is my dad, that's that. My sister is back in my life and she told me everything, Sally. Everything. I know who you are. You have a cold heart and a dark spirit. I feel sorry for your kids. They don't stand a chance with you and him. Katie will have my support in whatever she chooses. Part of me hopes something can be done about what you did to us. But I also don't want her to feel hurt again. As for me, I say bring it on. Nothing would please me more than seeing you face the consequences for what happened. It might be a dream, but if Katie can present herself as well as I think she can, I could see you both facing what you deserve. But it's up to Katie. Wait for a knock on the door, Katie warned. I looked around. Anyone else have something to say? I have a lot to say, but it won't help, Kathy said. You weren't the only one who won, Gigi. Gigi? Katie asked. Gentle giant, I whispered. That made her laugh, cuddling into me. I closed my eyes and kissed her forehead. Love you, little one. I love you, Daddy. I opened my eyes and saw Sally's face. She looked sad. Tears were on her cheeks. I should have enjoyed the moment, but she seemed broken. Goodbye, Sally. We won't see each other again, I said, leaning forward to disconnect before I blocked her. The next few days were emotional. Katie and I spent time talking about everything. She asked me to be honest with her. I told her it might upset her, but she insisted I'm her dad, and I would help her feel better. Telling her about those first few months really troubled her. I spent a whole week telling her that I had moved on from those old thoughts. Kathy helped me heal. With her back home, my life felt complete. Katie tried her best to share everything that had happened to her. I was especially touched by the diaries she kept since she was 9 years old. I wanted to keep them safe, but my teachers found them and told Sally, so I had to be more careful at home. I read all her diaries over the next few months. They weren't daily journals, but I would lie on the bed with Katie curled up next to me as she explained parts of them. Some of the entries brought tears to both our eyes. Then there was the time when she was 15, when she found me. Dear Daddy, I found you. I can't believe it, and you still love me. Sally told me for years that you stopped loving me, but you're alive. You have a new family, but you have never forgotten me. I'm 15 now, Daddy. I'm too young to fly across the world to see you. But I'm smart. Smarter than Sally and Tony think. I've learned from her how to treat people. I'm going to be better than Sally. I will regret what I have to do, but I need to do it. She hurt you, Daddy. She hurt me too. I really dislike her. But I must set that aside for what I need to do next. I want her to feel some of the pain she caused us. That means I have to change over the next few years. I have a plan in my head. I'm not sure it will work, but I've watched Sally closely. I wish I could send you a message right now, Daddy. I want to tell you how much I love you, how much I miss you, and that I feel pain just like you. But soon, we will be together again. I promise. The next 3 years will be hard for both of us, but I need to do this for us. Love you so much, Katie. Her last entry was the day before she left. Dear Daddy, when I look in the mirror, I feel like I see a stranger. In many ways, I am just like my mother. Thankfully, the only person who helped me through the past 18 months is Jennifer. She is the best part of my life. I know there will be two greatest days for me. The first was when I married my wife. The second will be the day we meet again, Daddy. I keep dreaming about it, wondering what it will be like. I'm in the house where I've lived since I was 5. Sally and Tony have no clue what I'm doing tomorrow. They still think I'm the perfect daughter who loves her mother and stepfather more than her own dad. I don't know how I've managed sometimes, Daddy. It has been hard, but I had to stay focused on my plan. This must hurt, just like it hurt you. Tony doesn't matter to me, but it has to hurt Sally. For 3 years, I've shown her love every single day, but she has no idea what I'm going to do. My things are waiting at Jennifer's. She's coming to see me tomorrow morning. The house will be quiet. Tony will be at work, and Sally will take the kids to school. I feel a bit sad for the kids, but really, it's Sally and Tony's fault. As I look around this room, I see things that are supposed to make me happy. But they never did, Dad. I try hard to remember my childhood, but it's mostly a blur. What I do remember is laughter. I think about the park. I remember you pushing me on the swing, helping me have fun while you talked to other moms. Sometimes, I wish you had been with someone else instead of Sally. This will be my last note, Dad. Tomorrow, my wife and I will fly to Singapore for a short visit before we go to Brisbane. Auntie Kelly will meet us there, and then we'll go to Longreach. On Sunday, I will see you for the first time in a long while. I'm crying again, Dad. But that's okay. I won't have to lie to myself anymore. I will be free. My wife will be with me as I meet my real family again. I know I might feel really nervous. I'll see you soon, Dad. I love you so much. I've never stopped loving you since the day I was taken. Your love kept me going. Your loving daughter, Katie. Epilogue, Katie Therapy helped. I really needed it. Dad came to join me later to talk about what happened. After I explained everything, the therapist was worried, but when they saw how real and loving my relationship with my dad was, we shared our feelings about what happened. The therapist helped us work through our feelings. I kept going every few weeks while Dad was strong. Kathy, Eli, and Bill were his therapists before. We didn't take any legal action against Sally and Tony. After our last talk, Dad never thought about them again, though he said he would support me if I wanted to handle things differently. It took me a bit longer. Therapy helped, but eventually I forgot about them. Since they had no way to contact us, we haven't heard from them since. Kelly hears things about people back in Sydney. John has passed away. He died 2 years after I came home. Kelly told Dad, but he barely reacted. It was like hearing about a stranger. It didn't mean much. Cheryl is now with a new partner, apparently the man she was seeing while with John. Brian is single, paying support to 3 ex-wives and dealing with some personal troubles. The farm was sold for a lot of money. My grandfather retired and moved to the northeast coast with my grandmother, buying a small house in a retirement community. Dad, Mom, my brothers and sisters, Jennifer and I, Kelly and Jim, we all moved close by, though we chose a bigger town nearby. Dad found a job as a civil engineer just like before. Mom surprised everyone by saying she'd be a stay-at-home mom but would also work part-time. Jennifer and I moved in next door, while Kelly, Jim, and my cousins moved in on the other side. Dad and Jim had bought 3 pieces of land and made sure our houses were just how we wanted them. Dad didn't need to work because the family had enough money, but he liked to stay busy. He always came home by 6 at night. He warned his bosses that if they kept giving him too much work, he would quit right away. He still remembered the past clearly. Kathy was always by his side. Jim started his own company, making sure he could stay close to his family, who were his top priority. My grandfather got to retire by the ocean, just like he wanted. It was Saturday, and Dad was putting his kids into their minivan. They were well-behaved, polite, and seemed like nice kids. Matthew was now 15 and looked a lot like his dad. Michelle was full of energy and very bright, while Ricky was still a bit shy but starting to come out of his shell. And then there was Samantha, who was just adorable. Dad really loved spending time with her and Michelle, making new memories with them that he couldn't have when I was younger. Sometimes he would look at me, and I could see a spark of nostalgia in his eyes. We shared long hugs, comforting each other, knowing everything was fine now. I practically saw Dad every day, and I treasured every hug we shared. Jennifer and I packed our car with our 2 kids. We both had boys through a special process. Jennifer joked about my dad possibly being involved, saying he had good genes. I found it funny. The next time we visited, when she mentioned it, Kathy laughed out loud, and Dad turned a bit red, which made it even funnier. "He's probably seen enough to know we're just joking," Kathy said with a smile. We exchanged fun jokes and made each other laugh while Dad smiled knowingly. He turned to me and joked about our light-hearted talks, and we all enjoyed the moment. It didn't take long to drive to the beach where we would meet our grandparents. Our grandfather was already in the ocean, enjoying a swim, just like he always did in the morning. There were good waves, so he could even try to surf a bit. Dad had loved surfing when he was younger and was excited to teach Jim and Matthew. We came together because we were family, happy to spend time with each other. Living at the farm had been nice. Both Jennifer and I had gone to college online and found jobs that let us work from home until we moved away. We loved being together all day and often planned our lunch breaks to share special moments. Our kids were old enough to understand their family, and we tried to explain everything to them clearly. Dad had let himself feel emotions again. When I gave him his first grandson, he was so happy. Each time he held our kids, he showed his love in his own kind way, knowing our family was getting even bigger. It was a beautiful spring day. The sun felt warm, and a cool breeze from the ocean kept us comfortable. Almost everyone jumped into the water for a swim before coming back to the sandy beach. We took out a cricket bat and tennis ball to play a game, which filled the air with laughter and happiness. Dad set up the portable grill to cook some food. We opened snacks and shared them around. No one really had any drinks, it just wasn't necessary. Dad put on a shirt and shorts, then took my hand and my mom's hand. He led us away from the others. We walked for a bit, leaning against the man we cared for so much. Mom loved him deeply, and there was a little worry for both of their feelings. My wife joked that she still worried she might wake up to find me next door, relaxing with Mom and Dad, which I did often at the farm. Kathy thought it was sweet, making up for the times I missed Dad's comfort after a bad dream and the fun moments in the morning when I would wake them. We stopped to enjoy the view of the ocean, standing quietly as we listened to the waves crash on the shore. A gentle wind blew sand against our legs. "I love you both so much," my dad said softly. "Honestly, it's hard to explain. The easiest way to say it is that you both kept me going. Kathy, you took a broken man and helped him heal with your love. And Munchkin, your love is what helped you stay strong, just like my love for you kept me going." He sighed. "I don't just have one best day in my life, I have so many." "The first was the day you were born, Munchkin. I remember promising to work hard to give you the best life I could. Through the ups and downs, I believe I've kept that promise. The next best day was marrying my wife. I hope I've lived up to my promises to her." Mom smiled warmly at Dad, touched by his words. Next was seeing my sister for the first time after 5 years. We both felt guilty for a while, but now we reassure each other that everything is okay. We're family again. The woman I see now is not the same one I grew up with. After that, the birth of my other 4 children. My heart feels so full every time I see us all together. After that, reuniting with my first daughter and enjoying every day since then. No matter how tough things get, even now that life is more comfortable, I just think about who is at home waiting for me. He smiled at me. My firstborn. He shared a loving look with my mom. "I love you, Daddy," I whispered. I stepped back to let my wife come closer. She smiled sweetly, and I turned to see my dad and mom sharing a warm moment together. The care in their gestures and the look in their eyes spoke volumes about their love. I cuddled close to my wife. It wasn't strange to see them. It was just a moment showing 2 people who still loved each other very much. Soon they saw us and laughed a little. Kathy leaned her head against his chest and silently said, "I love you too," while looking at me. My wife took my hand and guided me back to our family. Hey audience! If you like this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.